A mail-order bride sits frozen in a stagecoach, her hands trembling, unable to face the stranger who will become her husband. Outside, a weathered cowboy extends his hand and waits, not demanding, not rushing, just waiting. What happens next will change both their lives forever. This is a story of fear, patience, and the courage it takes to step into the unknown. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The stagecoach lurched to a halt in a cloud of rust-colored dust, and Evelyn Hart felt her heart stop with it. Through the small window she could see the town of Redstone sprawling before her like a rough sketch drawn in brown and gray. Wooden buildings that leaned slightly in the wind, a single church steeple pointing toward an endless blue sky, and dirt streets wide enough for cattle drives but empty now, except for a few curious onlookers. Everything about this place was different from Boston. Everything felt foreign, hard, unforgiving. And somewhere out there, waiting, was the man she'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry. Evelyn's gloved hands gripped the edge of her seat so tightly that her knuckles had gone white beneath the worn fabric. She could hear the driver climbing down from his perch, could hear the creak of leather and the jingle of harness as the horses shifted their weight. Any moment now, the door would open. Any moment now, she would have to step out into this strange new world and face Luke Barrett, a man she knew only through a handful of carefully written letters. "Miss Hart?" The driver's voice came through the door, rough but not unkind. "We're here, Redstone." Evelyn opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. Her throat had closed up entirely, as if her body itself was rebelling against what she was about to do. She heard footsteps approaching the coach, heavy boots on packed earth, a man's stride, confident and unhurried. Her breathing quickened, shallow and rapid, until dark spots danced at the edges of her vision. This was a mistake. This was all a terrible mistake. The door opened. Sunlight flooded the dim interior of the coach, momentarily blinding her. Evelyn raised one hand to shield her eyes, and through the glare she saw him. Luke Barrett stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, the other hanging loose at his side. He was taller than she'd imagined, broad-shouldered and solid in a way that spoke of years of hard physical work. His face was weathered, tanned dark by the relentless Colorado sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he was somewhere in his early 30s. He wore simple clothing, dark trousers, a cotton shirt open at the collar, a leather vest, and boots that had seen better days. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face, but she could see his eyes clearly enough. They were gray, storm cloud gray, and they were studying her with an intensity that made her want to disappear. "Miss Hart," he said, his voice low and measured. "I'm Luke Barrett." Evelyn couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare at this stranger who was supposed to become her husband. He waited a moment, perhaps expecting her to say something, to take his hand, to step down from the coach like a normal person. When she didn't, she saw a flicker of something cross his face, not impatience, but something softer, understanding, maybe, or pity. The thought of his pity made her want to weep. "Take your time," Luke said quietly. He shifted his stance, settling his weight more comfortably, and extended his right hand toward her. Not reaching into the coach, not trying to pull her out, just offering. "There's no rush." Behind him, Evelyn could see a small crowd beginning to gather. An older woman in a faded calico dress, a man with a silver beard and a marshal's badge pinned to his vest, two young boys who'd probably never seen an Eastern lady before, all of them watching, waiting to see what the new mail-order bride would do. The humiliation burned through her fear, hot and acidic. She'd come all this way, spent the last of her money on the train tickets and the stagecoach fare, left behind everything she'd ever known, and now she was frozen like a frightened child, unable to even step out of a coach. "I can't," she whispered, so softly she wasn't sure he'd heard her. But Luke Barrett heard. She saw it in the way his expression changed, the lines around his eyes deepening slightly as he processed her words. He didn't withdraw his hand. "Can't or won't?" he asked, and there was no judgment in his tone, only curiosity. "I don't know," Evelyn admitted, and felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of all these strangers. She would not. Luke was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something she didn't expect. He stepped back slightly, giving her more space, and lowered his hand to his side. "All right," he said simply. "Then we'll wait." "Wait?" Evelyn's voice came out higher than she intended. "For what?" "For you to be ready." "That could be—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "That could be forever," she'd been about to say. "That could be never." "Then I guess we'll be here a while." Luke reached up and adjusted his hat, tilting it back slightly so she could see his face more clearly. "Miss Hart, I want you to understand something right from the start. I asked you to come here, and you came. That took courage. More courage than most people have. But I didn't ask you to come here so you'd have to do things you're not ready for." Evelyn stared at him, trying to understand what he was saying. This wasn't how it was supposed to work. Mail-order brides were purchased, essentially, arrangements made between desperate women and lonely men. There were expectations, obligations. She'd signed her name to a contract of sorts. She'd agreed to marry him, to be his wife in every sense of the word, in exchange for passage west and a home. She owed him, and men collected their debts. But Luke Barrett wasn't acting like a man who'd just paid for a bride. He was acting like she didn't know what he was acting like. She'd never encountered anything like this before. "Mr. Barrett," she began. "Luke," he interrupted gently. "Just Luke." Luke. The name felt strange on her tongue. Too familiar, too intimate for someone she'd just met. "I signed a contract. I agreed to marry you. I can't just sit here indefinitely." "Why not?" The question was so unexpected that Evelyn actually laughed, a short, sharp sound that held no humor. "Because it's absurd. Because all these people are watching. Because you didn't pay for my passage across the country so I could have a fit of nerves in a stagecoach. I paid for your passage because I needed help on my ranch, and you needed a new start," Luke said, his voice still calm, still patient. "The marriage was your idea, if I recall correctly. You said in your letter that you wanted the security of a legal arrangement before you came west." He was right. Evelyn remembered writing that letter, late at night in her cramped boarding house room in Boston, trying to find the words to explain her situation without sounding completely desperate. She'd been very clear about wanting a marriage contract before she made the journey. At the time, it had seemed like the only way to protect herself. Now, trapped in this coach with Luke Barrett's steady gaze on her, she wasn't sure what she'd been thinking. "I did say that," she admitted quietly. "And I agreed because it seemed reasonable," Luke continued. "But Miss Hart, Evelyn, I want you to understand that the piece of paper we signed doesn't mean you stop having choices. You came here of your own free will. You can leave the same way, if that's what you decide. But first you have to step out of this coach." "I'm afraid," Evelyn said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I'm so afraid I can't breathe." "I know." Luke's voice was impossibly gentle. "I can see it. But I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to believe me. You're safe here. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to force you to do anything you don't want to do. All I'm asking right now is that you take my hand and let me help you down from this coach. That's all. Just that one small thing." Evelyn looked at his hand, calloused, scarred, strong, and then back at his face. He meant what he said. She could see it in his eyes, in the set of his shoulders, in the way he stood there so patiently while half the town watched and waited. But knowing he meant it didn't make her any less afraid. "What if I fall?" she whispered. "Then I'll catch you. What if I can't do this? What if I'm not strong enough? Then we'll figure something else out. What if—" "Evelyn," Luke cut her off, but not harshly. "You're asking what-if questions about things that haven't happened yet. Right now, in this moment, all you have to do is decide if you trust me enough to take my hand. Can you do that?" Could she? Evelyn looked down at her own hand, still gripping the edge of the seat. Her whole body was shaking. She'd been traveling for 3 weeks, by train, by wagon, by stagecoach. And every mile had taken her farther from everything she'd ever known. Farther from her old life, from her dead parents' debts, from the creditors who'd seized their home, from the so-called friends who'd disappeared the moment the money ran out. She'd left Boston with $30 in her reticule and a heart full of desperate hope. She'd endured uncomfortable seats and questionable food, and the stares of strangers who wondered what kind of woman traveled alone across the country to marry a man she'd never met. She'd survived 3 weeks of uncertainty and fear and bone-deep exhaustion. She could survive this. She could take his hand, couldn't she? "All right," Evelyn heard herself say. Her voice sounded thin and distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "All right." Luke's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes warmed. "All right," he echoed. He extended his hand again, palm up, and waited. This time, Evelyn forced herself to move. She released her death grip on the seat, her fingers cramping from the sudden change. She reached up with trembling hands and grasped the doorframe, pulling herself forward slightly. The coach seemed to tilt beneath her, though she knew it was only her own vertigo. Luke's hand remained steady, waiting. Evelyn took a breath, then another. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, she placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and solid, his calluses rough against her palm. She felt the strength in his fingers as they closed carefully around hers, firm enough to support her, gentle enough not to frighten her more than she already was. "There we go," Luke said softly. "Now, just put your foot on the step. I've got you." Evelyn obeyed, moving like a woman in a dream. Her foot found the narrow step bolted to the side of the coach. Her other hand reached for Luke's shoulder, and he shifted to better support her weight. "That's good," he encouraged. "One more step, nice and slow." The distance from the coach to the ground couldn't have been more than 3 feet, but to Evelyn, it felt like an impossible chasm. Her vision swam, her legs felt like water. "I can't," she gasped, freezing halfway down. "I'm sorry, I can't." "Yes, you can." Luke's voice was absolutely certain. "You already are. One more step, Evelyn. Just one more. And you're there." She didn't remember making the decision to move, but somehow her foot found the ground. Solid earth beneath her boot. Real, tangible, unmovable. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Evelyn's knees buckled. True to his word, Luke caught her. His arm came around her waist, strong and steadying, holding her upright as her body gave out entirely. She found herself pressed against his chest, her face buried in the worn cotton of his shirt, breathing in the scent of leather and hay and clean sweat. "Easy," Luke murmured, his voice rumbling through his chest. "I've got you. Just breathe." Evelyn tried to pull away, humiliated by her weakness, but her legs still wouldn't support her. Luke held her carefully, one arm around her waist, his other hand still clasping hers. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I'm so sorry." "Nothing to be sorry for," Luke said. "You just spent 3 weeks traveling. You're exhausted and overwhelmed. It's understandable. Everyone's watching. Let them watch." There was something almost defiant in his tone. "They'll get bored soon enough." He was right. Evelyn could feel her strength slowly returning, seeping back into her limbs like water into dry earth. She managed to straighten slightly, putting a few inches of space between herself and Luke's chest, though he didn't release her entirely. "Better?" he asked. "Yes. Thank you." Evelyn finally found the courage to look up at him. From this close, she could see the individual lines around his eyes, the small scar on his left cheekbone, the way his hair, dark brown with strands of premature gray, curled slightly where it touched his collar. "I must seem completely ridiculous to you." "You seem brave to me," Luke said simply. "Frightened, yes, but brave. There's a difference between not being afraid and doing something despite your fear." "That's a very generous interpretation." "It's the truth." Luke glanced past her at the coach driver, who was unloading her trunk and carpet bag from the boot. "Where are you staying?" The question caught Evelyn off guard. I assumed... Aren't I staying with you?" "No." The single word was so definitive that Evelyn felt a chill run through her despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. "I don't understand. In your letters you said, 'I said I needed help on my ranch, and that I was willing to marry to get it,'" Luke interrupted. "And I am. But I'm not the kind of man who expects a woman to move into his home the day she arrives, before she's even had a chance to catch her breath. You'll stay at Martha Sullivan's boarding house for now. Clean room, good food, respectable. You can rest, get your bearings, and we can take our time getting to know each other properly. Evelyn stared at him, trying to process this new information. Mr. Barrett, Luke, I appreciate the consideration, but I can't afford. I'll pay for it. That's not necessary. It is to me. Luke's tone left no room for argument. You came here based on my invitation. That makes you my responsibility. And my responsibility doesn't mean dragging you out to an isolated ranch when you can barely stand up straight. But the contract will still be there in a week or 2 weeks or however long it takes for you to feel ready. Luke finally released her waist but kept hold of her hand, as if he sensed she still needed something to anchor herself to. Evelyn, I know this isn't how these arrangements usually work. I know most men who send for mail-order brides expect them to step off the coach and straight into marriage. But I've thought about this a lot, and I don't believe that's right. This is going to be your life, too. You should have some say in how it starts. There was something in his voice, a conviction, a certainty, that made Evelyn wonder what had shaped this man's beliefs. Most men in his position would be well within their rights to insist on the marriage happening immediately. She'd agreed to come. She'd signed the contract. She owed him. But Luke Barrett was acting like he owed her, like her comfort and safety mattered more than his own convenience. It was the most unexpected thing anyone had ever done for her. I don't know what to say, Evelyn admitted. Say you'll stay at the boarding house and give yourself time to recover from the journey. Luke gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Say you'll have breakfast with me tomorrow morning so we can talk properly. Say you'll give this arrangement a fair chance before you decide whether or not I'm a man you can build a life with. And if I decide you're not? Luke's expression didn't change. Then I'll pay for your passage back to Boston, or to wherever else you want to go. No questions asked, no obligations owed. Evelyn felt something crack open inside her chest, some hard, protective shell she'd been carrying since her father died, and the creditors came knocking. It was too much. This stranger was being too kind, too patient, too impossibly decent, and she didn't know how to accept it. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why are you being like this? Luke was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes searching her face. When he finally spoke, his words were measured and careful. My mother was a mail-order bride, he said. Came out here in 1850 to marry my father, who she'd never met. He was a good man in many ways, but he wasn't always patient, wasn't always kind. He expected her to adapt immediately to a life she'd never known, in a place that was nothing like where she came from. It broke something in her. His jaw tightened slightly. I watched her struggle for years, trying to be what he needed her to be, trying to fit into a life she'd never chosen. By the time I was old enough to understand what I was seeing, it was too late to change it. I'm sorry, Evelyn said softly. Don't be sorry. Learn from it. Luke released her hand and reached up to adjust his hat again, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as something he did when he was uncomfortable. When I decided to look for a wife, I promised myself I'd do it differently. I'd give her choices. I'd give her time. I'd treat her like a partner, not property. He looked directly at her. So that's what I'm doing. If it makes things harder or slower, so be it. At least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. Evelyn felt tears welling up again, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from something else entirely. Relief, maybe, or gratitude, or the overwhelming realization that she might have accidentally stumbled into the one arrangement in 1,000 that wasn't designed to trap her. Thank you, she managed. Thank you. Luke nodded, then turned and gestured to someone in the small crowd. Martha, could you come here a moment? The older woman Evelyn had noticed earlier stepped forward. She was probably in her 50s, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and a face that suggested she'd seen every possible human behavior and remained unimpressed by most of it. But her eyes were kind. This is Martha Sullivan, Luke explained. She runs the boarding house. Martha, this is Evelyn Hart. She'll be staying with you for a while. Martha looked Evelyn up and down with the assessing gaze that somehow managed to be both critical and sympathetic. You look half dead, girl. When's the last time you had a proper meal? I'm not sure, Evelyn admitted. Yesterday, maybe? The food on the stagecoach was... Inedible, I know. Martha made a dismissive gesture. Well, come along then. I've got stew on the stove and fresh bread from this morning. We'll get some food in you and a hot bath drawn, and then you can sleep for about 12 hours. Luke, you get her trunk and bring it up to the blue room. Yes, ma'am. There was a hint of amusement in Luke's voice, as if he was accustomed to taking orders from Martha Sullivan. Martha held out her hand to Evelyn. Can you walk, or do you need help? I can walk, Evelyn said, and was relieved to find it was true. Her legs were steadier now, though she still felt like she might collapse at any moment. She took Martha's offered arm gratefully. Before they moved away, Evelyn looked back at Luke. He was already heading toward her trunk, apparently intent on carrying it himself rather than letting the coach driver handle it. As if sensing her gaze, he glanced over his shoulder and gave her a small nod. Tomorrow morning, he called, breakfast at Sullivan's. 8 o'clock, if that suits you. 8 o'clock, Evelyn agreed. Then Martha was guiding her away from the coach, away from the small crowd of onlookers, toward a 2-story building with a wide porch and blue-painted shutters. As they walked, Martha kept up a steady stream of conversation. Nothing important, just observations about the town and warnings about which merchants to trust and which to avoid. Evelyn understood that the older woman was trying to distract her, to ease her through those first difficult moments in a strange place, and she was grateful for it. But even as she listened and nodded and tried to take in all this new information, part of Evelyn's mind remained fixed on Luke Barrett, on the way he'd waited so patiently while she struggled with her fear, on the strength of his hand and the gentleness of his touch, on his matter-of-fact insistence that she deserved time and choices and respect. She'd come west expecting to trade one form of desperation for another, exchanging the poverty and scandal of Boston for the hard work and isolation of a Colorado ranch. She'd been prepared to endure whatever was necessary to survive. She hadn't been prepared for kindness. As Martha led her up the steps of the boarding house, Evelyn allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. It was small and fragile, barely more than a spark, but it was there. Maybe, just maybe, she'd made the right choice after all. Inside the boarding house, Martha's prediction proved accurate. There was indeed stew, thick and rich with vegetables and chunks of tender beef, and fresh bread still warm from the oven. Evelyn ate like a woman starving, which wasn't far from the truth, and accepted a second bowl when Martha offered it. The dining room was simple but clean, with checked curtains on the windows and wildflowers in a jar on the table. This is the blue room, Martha said, eventually, leading Evelyn up a narrow staircase to the second floor. It's my nicest, Luke insisted. The room was small but charming, with faded blue wallpaper and white lace curtains. An iron-frame bed stood against one wall, covered with a quilt in a pattern of interlocking rings. There was a washstand with a porcelain basin, a simple wardrobe, and a small writing desk beneath the window. I'll have my son bring up water for a bath, Martha continued. You take your time, get cleaned up, and then you sleep. Don't worry about anything else today. Tomorrow's soon enough for worrying. Martha, Evelyn said hesitantly, can I ask you something? Of course. Luke Barrett, what kind of man is he? Martha's expression softened slightly. The kind you can trust, she said simply. The kind who keeps his word. The kind who'd give you the shirt off his back if you needed it, even if it left him cold. She paused. But he is also the kind who's been alone too long. His ranch is about 8 miles outside of town, up in the foothills. Beautiful land, good water, but isolated. He doesn't come into town except for supplies and church on Sundays. Keeps to himself mostly. Why did he send for a mail-order bride? Because he's lonely, I expect. And because running a ranch that size takes more than one person can manage alone. Luke's a good rancher, but he's been working himself into the ground trying to do everything by himself. Martha studied Evelyn's face. He didn't tell you much in his letters, did he? Just the basics. That he had a ranch, that he needed help, that he was willing to marry to get it. Well, that's Luke for you. Never uses 10 words when 5 will do. Martha moved toward the door, then paused. He's a good man, Miss Hart. Whatever you're afraid of, it's not him you should be worried about. It's the life itself, the isolation, the hard work, the long winters. That's what breaks people out here, not the men they marry. After Martha left, Evelyn sank down onto the bed and let herself truly absorb where she was and what had just happened. She'd done it. She'd actually crossed the country, stepped out of that coach, and survived her first meeting with Luke Barrett. And more than that, she'd found something unexpected. A man who didn't want to own her, but to partner with her. A man who understood that she was more than a commodity to be purchased and put to work. Through the window, she could see the main street of Redstone stretching out below. It was late afternoon now, and the light had turned golden. A woman was sweeping the steps of what looked like a general store. Two men were loading supplies onto a wagon. Somewhere, a dog was barking. It wasn't Boston. It would never be Boston. But maybe, Evelyn thought, that wasn't such a bad thing after all. She stayed at the window until Martha's son, a gangly teenager with his mother's no-nonsense expression, knocked on the door to deliver the bath water. Then she stripped off her travel-stained dress and lowered herself into the steaming tub with a sigh of pure relief. The water was hot enough to turn her skin pink. She scrubbed away 3 weeks of dust and sweat and fear, washing her long dark hair until it squeaked clean. By the time she finally climbed out and dried herself with the rough towel Martha had provided, she felt almost human again. She found her nightgown in her carpet bag and pulled it on, then climbed into the bed. The mattress was softer than anything she'd slept on in weeks. The quilt smelled faintly of lavender. Evelyn closed her eyes, intending to rest for just a moment before unpacking her trunk. She didn't wake until morning. Sunlight was streaming through the lace curtains when Evelyn finally opened her eyes. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The room was unfamiliar. The sounds outside her window were wrong, and the quality of the light itself seemed different from what she was used to. Then memory returned in a rush, and she sat up abruptly, her heart racing. Colorado. Redstone. Luke Barrett. She'd slept through the entire evening and night without waking once. The exhaustion of her journey had caught up with her completely, dragging her down into a sleep so deep it felt like drowning. Now, disoriented and groggy, she fumbled for the small watch pinned to her traveling dress, which she draped over the chair beside the bed. 7:30. Panic flooded through her. Luke had said 8 o'clock. She had 30 minutes to make herself presentable for breakfast with the man she was supposed to marry, and she looked like she'd been dragged backwards through a hedge. Evelyn threw off the covers and rushed to the washstand, splashing cold water on her face. Her reflection in the small mirror above the basin showed a pale, thin face with dark circles under her eyes and hair that had dried in tangled waves while she slept. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman at the end of her resources, clinging to a desperate hope. She worked quickly, braiding her hair and pinning it up in a simple style that wouldn't take too much time. Her trunk had been delivered to the room while she slept. She could see it sitting in the corner, though she hadn't heard Luke bring it up. The thought of him moving quietly through the room while she was unconscious made her feel strangely vulnerable. Her traveling dress was hopelessly wrinkled and stained with dust from the journey. Evelyn opened her trunk and pulled out the only other respectable dress she owned, a simple gray cotton with black trim. Not quite mourning clothes, but somber enough to be appropriate for a woman whose parents had died less than a year ago. She'd had to sell most of her better dresses to help pay her father's debts, keeping only the bare essentials. As she buttoned the dress with trembling fingers, Evelyn tried to calm her racing thoughts. This was just breakfast, just a conversation. Luke had already seen her at her worst yesterday, frozen with fear, unable to even step out of a stagecoach. Whatever happened this morning couldn't possibly be more humiliating than that. She was fastening her last button when someone knocked on the door. "Miss Hart, it's Martha. Are you awake?" "Yes, I'm awake. Please come in." Martha entered carrying a small tray with a teacup and what looked like a biscuit. She took one look at Evelyn and smiled. "Well, you look considerably better than you did yesterday. Sleep helped." "I can't believe I slept so long." "Your body needed it. Here, drink this. It's just tea, nothing fancy, but it'll settle your stomach before breakfast." Martha set the tray on the writing desk. "Luke's already downstairs, been here about 10 minutes, sitting at the corner table looking uncomfortable. I told him you'd be down when you were ready." Evelyn's hand stilled on her collar. "He's here, now. Said 8 o'clock, didn't he? It's 7:45. Man's nothing if not punctual." Martha's expression turned more serious. "You don't have to go down if you're not ready. I can tell him you need more time." "No, I'll go." Evelyn straightened her shoulders. "I agreed to have breakfast with him. I should keep my word. That's good. But Miss Hart, Evelyn, remember what I told you yesterday. You don't owe Luke Barrett or anyone else more than you're willing to give. You hear me? Evelyn nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure she understood. Her entire life had been about owing people. Owing her father respect and obedience, owing the creditors money after he died, owing society the appearance of proper behavior even when she was drowning in debt and shame. The idea that she might not owe Luke Barrett her complete compliance was foreign and slightly terrifying. She took a few sips of the tea, which was strong and bitter but steadying, then followed Martha downstairs. The dining room looked different in the morning light. Several of the tables were occupied by boarders, working men mostly, ranch hands or miners who were staying in town temporarily. They looked up when Evelyn entered, their conversations dying away as they studied her with undisguised curiosity. She felt her face heat under their stares. Then Luke stood up from the corner table, and every other man in the room seemed to fade into insignificance. He'd cleaned up since yesterday. His dark hair was damp, as if he'd bathed recently, and he'd shaved. He wore a clean white shirt and dark trousers, and he'd left his hat hanging on a peg by the door. Without the wide brim shading his face, she could see him more clearly. The strong line of his jaw, the directness of his gaze, the way he held himself with a quiet confidence that suggested he was comfortable in his own skin. "Miss Hart," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room. "Good morning." "Good morning." Evelyn's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. She crossed to the table, acutely aware that everyone was watching. "I hope I haven't kept you waiting." "Not at all. Please, sit." Luke pulled out a chair for her, a gesture of courtesy that felt almost absurd given the circumstances. They were supposed to be discussing a marriage contract, not courting like proper society people. Evelyn sat, and Luke returned to his own seat across from her. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, neither quite sure how to begin. Martha appeared at Evelyn's elbow with a coffee pot. "Breakfast is eggs, bacon, and potatoes this morning. That suit you both?" "That's fine, thank you," Luke said. "Yes, thank you," Evelyn echoed. Martha poured coffee for both of them and disappeared back into the kitchen. The silence stretched between them, awkward and heavy. Evelyn wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to do with them. "Did you sleep well?" Luke asked finally. "Yes, very well. I didn't wake up until this morning." Evelyn paused. "Thank you for bringing my trunk up. I didn't hear you." "You were out cold. I tried to be quiet." Another silence. Evelyn took a sip of her coffee to have something to do. It was stronger than she usually took it, bitter enough to make her wince slightly. Luke noticed. "Too strong?" "I'm not used to it this way. In Boston, my family used to take coffee with cream and sugar." "Martha's got both. I can ask." "No, it's fine." Evelyn took another sip, forcing herself to swallow without reacting. "I need to get used to things being different here." Luke studied her for a moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. "Different doesn't have to mean worse. And there's no shame in liking what you like. Martha won't think less of you for wanting cream in your coffee." "It's not about what Martha thinks." "What is it about then?" Evelyn set down her cup carefully, trying to find the right words. "In Boston, after my father died, and the creditors took everything, I learned very quickly that people judge you by the smallest things. If you put cream in your coffee when you can't afford to keep a roof over your head, they call you frivolous and wasteful. If you try to maintain any standards at all, they say you're putting on airs above your station." She looked up at him. "I suppose I'm still learning that I don't have to justify every small choice I make." Luke's expression softened. "You don't. Not to me, anyway. If you want cream in your coffee, have cream in your coffee. If you want to take it black, that's fine too. But don't deny yourself something you want just because you think it makes you look stronger or more adaptable. That's not strength. That's just making yourself miserable for no reason." Before Evelyn could respond, Martha returned with 2 heaping plates of food. The eggs were cooked over easy, the bacon was crisp, and the potatoes were seasoned with something that smelled like rosemary. Evelyn's stomach growled audibly. "Cream's on the side table if you want it," Martha said pointedly, looking at Evelyn. Then she was gone again, leaving them alone. For a few minutes they ate in silence. Evelyn was hungrier than she'd realized, and the food was better than anything she'd tasted in weeks. She'd nearly cleaned her plate before she remembered that ladies were supposed to eat daintily and leave something behind to show they weren't gluttonous. When she looked up, she found Luke watching her with something that might have been approval. "It's good to see you eat," he said simply. "You're too thin." Evelyn felt her defenses rise. "I'm perfectly healthy." "Didn't say you weren't, just said you're too thin. There's a difference." Luke set down his fork. "Evelyn, I'm going to be direct with you because I don't see the point in dancing around things. You came out here because you were desperate. I know that. You know that. Let's not pretend otherwise." The bluntness of his words hit her like cold water. Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes, though she blinked them back furiously. "That's rather cruel." "Is it? Or is it honest?" Luke leaned forward slightly. "I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to make sure we both understand what we're doing here. You didn't come west on some romantic adventure. You came because you'd run out of options in Boston. And I didn't send for a mail-order bride because I'm some lonely romantic. I sent for you because I need help running my ranch, and I'm tired of doing everything alone." "Then why are you being so—" Evelyn struggled to find the right word. "So considerate? Why not just insist on the marriage immediately and put me to work?" "Because consideration and practicality aren't opposites." Luke picked up his coffee cup, turning it slowly in his hands. "Yes, I need help on the ranch. Yes, I want a wife. But I also want someone who chooses to be there, not someone who's trapped and miserable. A resentful partner is worse than no partner at all. So I'm giving you time to see what you're getting into and decide if it's something you can live with." Evelyn absorbed this slowly. "How much time?" "As much as you need. A week, 2 weeks, a month. However long it takes for you to feel like you're making a real choice, not just accepting the only option you've got. And if I decide I can't do it, then like I said yesterday, I'll pay for your passage to wherever you want to go." Luke met her eyes steadily. "But I'm hoping you won't decide that. I'm hoping you'll give this a real chance." "Why me?" The question burst out of Evelyn before she could stop it. "You could have chosen any number of women. Why did you answer my letter?" Luke was quiet for a long moment. "You want the truth?" "Yes." "Because you were honest. Most of the letters I got were full of flowery language about fresh starts and new beginnings. Lots of talk about how the woman was ready to embrace ranch life and work hard. But your letter was different. You told me straight out that you were in debt, that your father had died, that the creditors were coming for everything. You said you needed a way out and you were willing to work for it. You didn't try to make yourself sound more appealing than you were. You just told me the truth." Evelyn remembered writing that letter, sitting up late in her boarding house room with her last candle burning low. She'd been so tired of pretending, so exhausted by the effort of maintaining appearances. She'd decided that if she was going to write to a complete stranger and propose marriage, she might as well be honest about why. "I thought honesty might be a liability," she admitted. "To some men, maybe. Not to me." Luke pushed his empty plate aside. "I've had enough of people who tell me what they think I want to hear. I'd rather have someone who tells me the truth, even if it's not pretty." "All right then. Here's the truth." Evelyn straightened in her chair. "I'm terrified. I'm terrified of this place, of this life, of you. I'm terrified that I'm not strong enough to survive here. I'm terrified that I made a horrible mistake coming west. But I'm also terrified that if I go back to Boston, I'll end up in debtor's prison or worse. I'm terrified every single moment of every single day, and I don't know how to make it stop." The words hung in the air between them. Evelyn couldn't believe she'd said them out loud, but now that they were out, she felt strangely lighter, as if some terrible pressure had been released. Luke didn't look shocked or disgusted. He just nodded slowly. "That's fair. Fear makes sense given your situation. But can I tell you something? Fear isn't the same as weakness. Some of the strongest people I've ever known were afraid most of the time. They just didn't let the fear stop them from doing what needed to be done." "Is that supposed to be encouraging?" "It's supposed to be realistic." A slight smile tugged at the corner of Luke's mouth. "Evelyn, I'm not going to tell you everything will be fine or that ranch life is easy once you get used to it. It's not. It's hard work, long days, and sometimes things go wrong no matter how careful you are. But I can tell you this, if you decide to stay, I'll teach you everything you need to know. I'll be patient when you make mistakes, and I'll never ask you to do something I wouldn't do myself. That's a lot to promise. It's what my mother should have had for my father. It's the least I can offer you. Luke paused. But I need something from you too. What? I need you to actually give this a chance. Not just agree because you don't see any other option, but really try. Come out to the ranch. See what the work is like. See if you can imagine building a life there. And if you can't, be honest about it. Don't marry me out of obligation and then spend the rest of your life hating me for it. Evelyn considered this. When would I come out to the ranch? Whenever you're ready. Today, tomorrow, next week. Your choice. Today, Evelyn heard herself say. The word came out before she'd fully thought it through, but once it was spoken, she realized it was what she wanted. Waiting would only make her more anxious. Better to see what she was potentially committing to sooner rather than later. Luke's eyebrows rose slightly. Today? You're sure? You just got here yesterday. I slept for almost 14 hours. I'm as rested as I'm going to be. And you're right. If I'm going to make a real decision about this, I need to see what I'm deciding about. Sitting in a boarding house for another week isn't going to change anything. For the first time since she'd met him, Luke smiled, really smiled. Not just the slight upturn of his mouth, but a genuine expression of pleasure that transformed his entire face. It made him look younger, less weathered, almost boyish. All right then, he said. Today it is. I need to pick up some supplies from the general store in Tihia and then we can head out. It's about an hour's ride to the ranch. Do you ride? Not well. I took a few lessons when I was younger, but that was years ago. That's fine. I've got a gentle mare that'll suit you. Her name's Daisy, and she's patient with inexperienced riders. Luke stood up and reached for his hat. Get whatever you need for the day. Wear practical clothing if you have it, something you can move in. We'll be back before dark. After Luke left to get his supplies, Evelyn returned to her room in a daze. What had she just agreed to? Going out to an isolated ranch with a man she barely knew, miles from town, with no one else around. A week ago, the thought would have terrified her into paralysis. But Luke Barrett wasn't like the men she'd known in Boston, the creditors who'd stripped her family home bare, the landlord who'd tried to suggest alternative payment arrangements when she couldn't make rent, the so-called gentleman who'd looked at her with speculation once her father's protection was gone. There was something fundamentally decent about Luke, something solid and trustworthy that she recognized even through her fear. Or maybe she was just desperate enough to see what she wanted to see. Maybe she was deluding herself into thinking this arrangement could be anything other than another form of transaction, bodies and labor exchanged for security and survival. Evelyn pushed the thoughts away and focused on the practical matter of what to wear. She didn't have much in the way of practical clothing. Most of her dresses were designed for life in the city, with tight bodices and long skirts that would be completely unsuitable for ranch work. Finally, she settled on the plainest dress she owned, a brown calico that had been her work dress back in Boston. It was faded and had been mended several times, but it allowed her to move more freely than her other options. She was pinning up her hair when Martha knocked on the door. "Come in," Evelyn called. Martha entered with what looked like a riding hat. "Thought you might need this. Sun's brutal this time of day, and you've got city skin. You'll burn if you're not careful." "Thank you." Evelyn took the hat, touched by the gesture. "Martha, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think I'm making a mistake, going out to Luke's ranch today?" Martha settled herself on the edge of the bed, her expression thoughtful. "That depends on what you're hoping to find there." "I don't know what I'm hoping to find. I just know I need to see it. Need to understand what kind of life he's offering me." "Then no, it's not a mistake. Going in blind would be a mistake. Going with your eyes open is just smart." Martha paused. "But Evelyn, I want you to understand something. Luke's ranch is beautiful, some of the best land in the territory, but it's also isolated. The nearest neighbor is about 4 miles away. In winter, you can go weeks without seeing anyone but Luke. Some women thrive in that kind of solitude. Others," she shook her head, "others wither away like plants without sunlight. You need to figure out which kind you are." "I don't know which kind I am." "Then this visit will tell you." Martha stood up and moved toward the door. One more thing. Luke Barrett is a good man, but he's been alone a long time. He's used to his own company, his own routines. If you do decide to marry him, it's going to take work from both of you to figure out how to share a life. Don't expect it to be easy just because he's being considerate right now. After Martha left, Evelyn sat at the writing desk and tried to compose her thoughts. Everything was happening so fast. Yesterday, she'd been too afraid to step out of a stagecoach. Today, she was preparing to visit an isolated ranch with a man she'd just met. Tomorrow? Who knew what tomorrow would bring? She thought about writing a letter to someone back in Boston, but there was no one left who cared what happened to her. Her mother's family had disowned her father when he'd made some bad investments. Her father's friends had disappeared the moment it became clear there was no money left. The women she'd thought were friends had proven to be acquaintances at best, more interested in gossip than genuine support. She was alone in the world except for Luke Barrett and this fragile possibility of a new life. The thought should have terrified her. Strangely, it didn't. Or maybe she'd simply exhausted her capacity for terror and moved into some calmer space beyond it. When Luke returned an hour later, Evelyn was waiting in the boarding house parlor, the writing hat perched awkwardly on her head. He took one look at her and smiled again, that transformation that made him seem like a completely different person. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be." He led her out to where two horses were tied to the hitching post in front of the boarding house. One was a large bay gelding, clearly Luke's mount. The other was a smaller chestnut mare with a white blaze on her face and gentle eyes. "This is Daisy," Luke said, running his hand down the mare's neck. "Daisy, this is Evelyn. You're going to take good care of her, understand?" The horse whuffed softly, as if agreeing. Luke showed Evelyn how to mount, supporting her weight as she got her foot into the stirrup and swung her leg over. It felt precarious and strange, sitting so high off the ground, but Daisy stood perfectly still throughout the process. "Good," Luke said once Evelyn was settled. "Now Daisy knows the way home, so mostly you just need to sit there and let her follow. If you want her to stop, pull gently back on the reins. If you want her to go, give her a little nudge with your heels. But honestly, she'll probably just do what my horse does without you having to do much of anything." "That sounds perfect for someone of my limited skill," Evelyn said. Luke mounted his own horse with the ease of someone who'd been riding since childhood. Then he clicked his tongue and his gelding started forward. True to his word, Daisy followed without any prompting from Evelyn. They rode through the center of Redstone at a walk, and Evelyn had her first real chance to see the town in daylight. It was small, probably not more than 300 people lived here permanently, but it seemed prosperous in a rough frontier way. There was a general store, a blacksmith, a church, a saloon, and a handful of other businesses she couldn't identify. People stopped what they were doing to watch them pass, and Evelyn saw several women whispering behind their hands. "They're curious about you," Luke said, noticing her discomfort. "Mail-order bride is still somewhat unusual out here. Give them a few weeks, and they'll find something else to talk about." "Does it bother you that they're talking?" "No, let them talk. Doesn't change anything." He glanced over at her. "Does it bother you?" "I've survived worse gossip," Evelyn said. "In Boston, after my father died, I couldn't go anywhere without people whispering about the debts and the scandal. At least here, they're just curious, not malicious." Once they left the town behind, the landscape opened up dramatically. The land rolled away in every direction, covered in short grass and sagebrush. In the distance, mountains rose up like jagged teeth against the brilliant blue sky. The air was so clear and clean that Evelyn felt like she could see forever. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Luke looked pleased. "It is. Sometimes I forget, living here every day. But yeah, it's beautiful." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. The motion of the horse was soothing, and Daisy's steady pace made Evelyn feel secure despite her inexperience. The sun was warm on her shoulders, though the riding hat Martha had given her kept it off her face. "Tell me about your ranch," Evelyn said eventually. "What kind of cattle do you raise?" "Mostly longhorns right now, though I'm trying to breed in some Hereford stock to improve the meat quality. I've got about 300 head, give or take. The ranch is roughly 2,000 acres, half of it open grazing land, the rest forested. There's a creek that runs through the property year-round, which is why my father chose this land. Good water is worth more than gold out here." And you manage all of that yourself? For the most part, I hire a few hands during calving season and roundup, but otherwise it's just me. That's part of why I need... He paused. Part of why I wanted a wife. I can't keep up with everything alone. I need someone who can handle the house, the garden, the chickens, maybe help with the accounts and the lighter ranch work. Someone who can be a real partner. What happened to your parents? Evelyn asked. You mentioned your mother was a mail-order bride. Luke was quiet for a moment, and Evelyn worried she had overstepped. But then he began to speak, his voice measured and careful. My father died about 5 years ago, kicked by a horse. He was 52. My mother... He paused again. My mother died when I was 16. Pneumonia, the doctor said. But I think it was more than that. I think she'd just stopped wanting to live. She'd been unhappy for so long, trying to adapt to a life she'd never wanted, trying to be what my father needed her to be. When she got sick, it was almost like she welcomed it, like she saw it as a way out. I'm sorry, Evelyn said quietly. It was a long time ago, but it shaped how I think about marriage, about bringing someone out here. I don't want to make the same mistakes my father did. Luke glanced at her. That's why I'm being so careful with you, why I'm giving you choices. I saw what happens when you don't, and I won't repeat that. They crested a rise, and Luke pointed ahead. There, that's the ranch. Evelyn looked where he was pointing and felt her breath catch. Nestled in a valley between two gentle hills was a house, a real house, not a cabin, built of logs and stone. It had a wide porch that wrapped around two sides, a stone chimney rising from one end, and real glass windows that caught the sunlight. Near the house were several outbuildings, a barn, what looked like a chicken coop, a shed, and a small structure she couldn't identify. Beyond the immediate buildings, she could see cattle dotting the hillsides, dark shapes against the golden grass. The creek Luke had mentioned ran along the southern edge of the property, marked by a line of cottonwood trees. And everywhere she looked, there were mountains, not distant and hazy, but close enough to touch, their peaks still holding patches of snow despite the warmth of the day. Luke, she breathed, it's incredible. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You think so? How could anyone not think so? It's like something out of a painting. They rode down into the valley, and as they got closer, Evelyn could see more details. The house was well maintained, the logs chinked carefully against the weather. The porch had a rocking chair on it and a bench. Someone, Luke, she assumed, had planted flowers in old whiskey barrels near the front door. They were wildflowers mostly, nothing fancy, but they added a touch of color and life. Luke helped her dismount, his hand steady on her waist as she slid down from Daisy's back. Her legs were shaky from the ride, and she stumbled slightly. He caught her easily. You'll get used to it, he said. Takes a while to build up the muscles for riding. He led her up onto the porch and opened the front door. The interior of the house was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took Evelyn's eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, she found herself in a large main room that served as both kitchen and living area. There was a stone fireplace on one wall, a cast-iron stove in the corner, a sturdy wooden table with 4 chairs, and a few pieces of simple furniture, a settee, an armchair, a bookshelf. Everything was clean and orderly in a way that surprised her. She'd expected bachelor quarters to be messy, but Luke clearly took pride in his home. 2 bedrooms through there, Luke said, gesturing to doors on either side of the main room. The larger one was my parents'. The smaller one was mine growing up. There's a root cellar under the kitchen for storage, and the well is just outside the back door. Evelyn walked slowly through the space, taking it all in. The house was simple but solid, built to last. There was something almost comforting about its plainness. No pretension, no unnecessary decoration, just honest craftsmanship and careful maintenance. She noticed books on the shelf and moved closer to examine them. There was a Bible, several practical volumes on animal husbandry and farming, but also books of poetry, a volume of Shakespeare, and what looked like a collection of folk tales. You read, she said, surprised. When I have time. My mother taught me. She loved books, used to read to me every night when I was young. Luke came to stand beside her. Said that just because we lived in the wilderness didn't mean we had to be ignorant. Evelyn pulled out the volume of poetry and opened it to a random page. The margins were filled with notes in a delicate feminine hand. Your mother's? Yes, she wrote in all her books. I can't bring myself to get rid of them, even though... He trailed off. Even though reading her notes makes you sad? Something like that. Evelyn carefully returned the book to its place. She was beginning to understand Luke Barrett better, a man shaped by watching his mother's slow dissolution, determined not to repeat his father's mistakes, living alone in this beautiful place and trying to honor a promise he'd made to himself about how he'd treat the woman he'd eventually bring here. Show me the rest, she said. Over the next few hours, Luke walked her through the entire operation. He showed her the barn where he kept the horses and the milk cow. He showed her the chicken coop, currently empty but ready for birds. He explained the seasonal rhythms of ranch life, calving in spring, branding and castration shortly after, moving the herd to higher pastures in summer, roundup in fall, and the long, hard work of winter feeding when the snow got deep. It's not easy work, he said honestly, as they stood near the creek, watching the water flow past. Some days I'm up before dawn and don't get to bed until after dark. There are times when things go wrong. Cattle get sick, predators take calves, drought makes the grass scarce. You can do everything right and still have a hard year. But you love it, Evelyn said. It wasn't a question. I do. I love the land, the work, the independence of it. I love knowing that everything I have, I built with my own hands. I love watching the seasons change and the cattle thrive. He looked at her directly. But I need you to understand what you'd be signing up for. This isn't Boston. There are no neighbors to visit every day, no shops to browse, no social events or parties. In winter, we might not see another person for weeks. It's hard, isolated, and sometimes lonely. If you need people around you to be happy, you'll be miserable here. Evelyn thought about Boston, about the crowds and the noise and the constant press of humanity. She thought about the boarding house where she'd lived after her father died, sharing a room with 2 other women and never having a moment's peace or privacy. She thought about the judgment in people's eyes and the whispers that followed her everywhere. I'm not sure I need people as much as I thought I did, she said slowly. In Boston, I was surrounded by people all the time, but I've never felt more alone. Luke nodded. That's different then. Being alone isn't the same as being lonely. Some people thrive in solitude. They walked back to the house, and Luke prepared a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and cold meat. As they ate, Evelyn asked questions, practical questions about the work, about what would be expected of her, about how they would manage the division of labor if she stayed. Luke answered everything honestly, neither minimizing the difficulty nor exaggerating his expectations. He made it clear that he expected hard work, but he also made it clear that he would teach her everything she needed to know. What about the marriage itself? Evelyn asked finally, pushing her empty plate away. If I agree to this, what would you expect from me as a wife? Luke met her eyes steadily. Respect, partnership, honesty, and yes, eventually, intimacy. I won't lie to you, Evelyn. I want a real marriage, not just a business arrangement. I want someone to share my bed as well as my work. But I also want that to happen naturally, when we're both ready, not because some contract says it should. Evelyn felt her face heat, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. How long would you be willing to wait? As long as it takes for you to trust me enough to want that. Weeks, months. I don't know. But I'm not going to force myself on you. That's a promise. The directness of the conversation should have mortified her, but instead Evelyn felt oddly relieved. At least there would be no misunderstandings, no hidden expectations that would surface later. They spent the rest of the afternoon outside. Luke showed her how to pump water from the well, how to scatter feed for the chickens he planned to buy, how to identify different plants growing wild on the property, some edible, some medicinal, some poisonous. He introduced her to the cattle closest to the house, pointing out their individual personalities and quirks. You have to understand them, he explained. They're not just livestock. Each one is different. This old girl here, she's the matriarch of the herd. The others follow her lead. That young bull over there, he's got a mean streak. You stay clear of him, but most of them are gentle enough if you respect them. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Luke called an end to the tour. We should head back. I want to get you to town before dark. But Evelyn wasn't ready to leave yet. She walked to the edge of the porch and stood looking out over the valley, watching the way the light changed everything it touched. The land seemed to glow from within, alive and beautiful, and utterly foreign to everything she'd known. "Evelyn?" Luke's voice was gentle. "What are you thinking?" She turned to face him. "I'm thinking that I never expected any of this. Not the house, not the land, not you. I expected something harsher, more desperate, more like a transaction. It is a transaction, in a way. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But it's not just that, is it?" Luke shook his head slowly. "No, it's not just that." They stood there in the fading light, two people trying to figure out if they could build something real from such an unlikely beginning. Finally, Luke broke the silence. "Do you want to stay for supper? It'll be simple, just stew left from yesterday, but you're welcome." Every instinct Evelyn had told her to say no, to maintain proper distance, to go back to the safety of the boarding house. But she found herself nodding. "Yes, I'd like that." Over simple bowls of beef stew and more of Martha's bread, which Luke had bought that morning, they talked more easily than they had all day. Luke told her stories about the early years of the ranch, about the struggles and small triumphs. Evelyn told him about her childhood in Boston, about her father's work as a clerk, about the slow slide into debt that had consumed her family's final years. "Do you miss it?" Luke asked. "Boston?" "I miss what it used to be," Evelyn said carefully. "Or maybe I miss who I used to be there before everything fell apart. But the Boston I left behind? No, I don't miss that at all." As full darkness fell and Luke lit the lamps, Evelyn realized with a start how late it had gotten. "We need to go. Martha will worry. It's too dark now for a safe ride." Luke spoke matter-of-factly. "The trail's rough in places, and these mountains can be dangerous at night. I'll ride into town and let Martha know you're staying here tonight. You can take my parents' room, and I'll sleep out here on the settee." "That's not necessary. I can—" "Evelyn?" Luke's tone was firm but kind. "I'm not going to risk your safety trying to navigate that trail in the dark. You'll stay here tonight, properly chaperoned by distance and locked doors, and we'll ride back to town in the morning. All right?" She wanted to argue, but the exhaustion of the day was catching up with her. "All right." After Luke left for town, Evelyn explored the bedroom that had belonged to his parents. It was simple but comfortable, with a large bed covered in a wedding ring quilt and a wardrobe that still held a few of his mother's dresses. She touched the fabric gently, thinking about the woman who'd worn them, who'd come west as a mail-order bride and slowly withered under the weight of a life she couldn't adapt to. Would Evelyn do the same? Or would she be different? Could she be strong enough, adaptable enough, brave enough to build a real life here? She didn't know. But standing in that quiet house, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness through the window, she thought maybe she wanted to find out. Luke returned an hour later to find Evelyn sitting in the rocking chair on the porch, wrapped in a blanket she'd found in the bedroom. The night air had turned cool, and overhead the stars blazed with an intensity she'd never seen in Boston, where coal smoke and gaslight dimmed the sky. "Martha understood," he said, climbing the porch steps. "She wasn't happy about it, but she understood. I told her we'd be back by mid-morning." "Thank you." Evelyn pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I've never seen stars like this." Luke settled himself on the porch railing, looking up. "City lights hide them. Out here, on a clear night, you can see thousands. My mother used to say they were like diamonds spilled across black velvet." She was right. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "Luke, can I ask you something personal?" "I suppose that depends on how personal." "When you decided to send for a mail-order bride, were you looking for someone specific, or would any capable woman have done?" Luke considered the question carefully. "Bit of both, I guess. I needed someone who could work hard, someone practical and honest. But I also wanted someone who could be more than just a hired hand. Someone I could talk to at the end of the day, someone who'd challenge me when I was being stubborn, someone who'd make this house feel like a home instead of just a place I sleep." He looked at her. "Why do you ask?" "Because I'm trying to understand what you see when you look at me. I'm not strong like the women who grew up out here. I don't know anything about ranching or frontier life. I can barely ride a horse. What made you think I could be what you need?" You want the honest answer? Always. Luke shifted his weight, the railing creaking slightly beneath him. When I read your letter, I saw someone who'd been knocked down by life, but hadn't stayed down. You could have done a lot of things when your father died and the debts came due. You could have looked for a wealthy man to marry in Boston, traded your respectability for financial security. You could have given up entirely. But instead, you scraped together enough money to travel 2,000 miles to marry a stranger just because you weren't willing to let circumstances destroy you completely. He paused. That's not weakness, Evelyn. That's steel wrapped in silk. That's exactly the kind of strength you need to survive out here. Evelyn felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. I don't feel strong. Most of the time, I just feel scared. Scared and strong aren't opposites. Some of the bravest people I've known were terrified every single day. They just didn't let the fear win. Luke stood up from the railing. You should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be another long day. But Evelyn didn't move from the rocking chair. What happens next? If I decide I want to try this, what's the next step? We get to know each other better. You keep staying at Martha's, but you come out here during the days. I teach you what you need to know about ranch life. We work together, eat together, talk together. We figure out if we can actually stand each other's company for more than a few hours at a time. Luke's voice was matter of fact. And when we're both ready, when you feel like you're making a real choice and not just accepting the only option you have, we get married. How long do you think that will take? I don't know. A few weeks, maybe a month, however long it needs to be. Evelyn finally stood up, folding the blanket carefully. All right, let's do that. Luke's expression warmed. Yeah? Yeah. She managed a small smile. I can't promise I won't be terrible at everything. I can't promise I won't have moments where I panic and want to run back to Boston, but I can promise I'll try. That's all I can offer right now. That's enough, Luke said simply. That's more than enough. The next morning they rode back to Redstone as the sun was rising, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold. When they arrived at the boarding house, Martha was waiting on the porch with her arms crossed and a stern expression that softened slightly when she saw them. You two caused quite a stir, she said. Half the town thinks you've already married in secret. Let them think what they want, Luke said, helping Evelyn dismount. We know the truth. The truth isn't always enough to stop gossip, but Martha's tone was more resigned than angry. Evelyn, come inside. You need breakfast and a proper wash. Luke, I expect you have work to do. Over the next 3 weeks, a pattern emerged. Each morning, Luke would arrive at the boarding house at 7 o'clock sharp. They'd have breakfast together while he outlined what he planned to teach her that day. Then they'd ride out to the ranch, and Evelyn would spend hours learning skills she'd never imagined needing. Luke taught her how to pump and carry water without spilling half of it, how to build and maintain a fire in both the stove and the fireplace, how to recognize the signs of weather changing, the way the wind shifted before a storm, the particular quality of light that meant rain was coming, the behavior of animals that indicated approaching danger. He showed her how to milk the cow, her hands clumsy at first on the warm udders until she found the rhythm of it, how to collect eggs from the nesting boxes without disturbing the hens, how to churn butter, a task that left her arms aching and made her appreciate every pat of butter she'd ever eaten without thought. She learned to identify edible plants and avoid poisonous ones. She learned which herbs could be used for medicine and which for cooking. She learned how to preserve food in the root cellar, how to judge the quality of hay, how to mend harnesses and saddles with leather and strong thread. Some tasks came easily to her. She had a natural head for numbers and took over managing Luke's accounts, organizing his records in a way that made sense and would help him track his profits and expenses more efficiently. She could read and write well, skills that proved valuable when Luke needed to draft letters to potential buyers or suppliers. But other tasks were harder. Physical labor exhausted her quickly at first, her body unaccustomed to the demands Luke's life placed on it. She developed blisters on her hands from hauling water and chopping vegetables. Her back ached from bending over the garden. Her thighs burned from hours in the saddle as Luke gradually increased the length of their rides. Through it all, Luke remained patient. When she made mistakes, and she made many, He never lost his temper or made her feel stupid. He simply showed her the correct way again and again and again until her hands knew what to do without her mind having to direct them. "You're doing well," he said one afternoon as they worked together in the garden, pulling weeds and checking on the vegetables he'd planted earlier in the season. "Better than I expected, honestly." Evelyn wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "I'm slow at everything." "Slow isn't the same as incompetent. You're learning, and you're getting better every day. That's what matters." Luke sat back on his heels, studying the neat rows they'd weeded. "Besides, you brought something to this ranch I didn't have before." "What's that? The ability to make everything take twice as long?" Luke laughed, a sound Evelyn had heard more frequently as the weeks passed. "No, you brought order, organization. Before you came, my records were a mess. I knew roughly what I had and what I owed, but I couldn't have told you exactly without spending hours going through scattered papers. Now I can look at your ledgers and know instantly where I stand financially. That's valuable. I'm glad I can contribute something beyond comic relief." "You contribute more than you think." Luke's voice turned serious. "Evelyn, I want you to know something. These past few weeks, having you here, working alongside you, talking with you at the end of the day, it's made me realize how lonely I've been. I didn't even know how much I was missing until you showed up and filled that empty space." Evelyn felt her heart skip. They'd grown comfortable with each other over the weeks, developing an easy rhythm of work and conversation. But this was the first time Luke had said anything so openly emotional. "I felt it too," she admitted. "The difference between being alone and being lonely. I thought I understood it before, but I didn't. Not really." They looked at each other across the garden rows, the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders and dirt under their fingernails. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that what had started as a practical arrangement was becoming something more. "I think we should set a date," Luke said. "For the wedding." Evelyn's breath caught. "You do?" "Unless you need more time. But Evelyn, I've watched you these past weeks. I've seen you push through exhaustion and frustration. I've seen you tackle tasks you'd never done before without complaining. I've seen you get knocked down, literally, when that rooster attacked you, and get right back up again." He smiled at the memory. "You're ready for this life. Question is, are you ready for me?" Was she? Evelyn searched her feelings carefully. The terror that had paralyzed her in the stagecoach 3 weeks ago had faded to something more manageable. Not gone entirely, but no longer overwhelming. When she thought about marrying Luke now, she didn't feel the same blind panic. Instead, she felt something that might have been anticipation. "I'm ready," she said. "Or at least, I'm as ready as I'll ever be." "That's honest enough." Luke stood up and offered her his hand, pulling her to her feet. "How about 2 weeks from Saturday? That gives us time to prepare properly and for the banns to be read at church." 2 weeks, Evelyn repeated, testing the words. "All right, 2 weeks." The announcement of their engagement caused exactly the stir Martha had predicted. The women of Redstone descended on Evelyn with a mixture of curiosity, advice, and judgment. Some were kind, offering recipes and household tips. Others were more reserved, clearly skeptical that a city woman could make it as a rancher's wife. The most helpful was Sarah Mitchell, a woman about 10 years older than Evelyn who ran a small farm with her husband on the other side of town. She appeared at the boarding house one afternoon with a basket of preserves and a practical attitude. "Don't let the gossips get to you," Sarah said, settling herself at the table in Evelyn's room. "Half of them have never worked a day as hard as what you'll be doing on Luke's ranch, but that won't stop them from having opinions about how you should do it." "Do you think I can do it?" Evelyn asked bluntly. "Be the kind of wife Luke needs?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "I think if you couldn't, you'd have run back to Boston by now. The fact that you're still here, that you've spent 3 weeks learning ranch work instead of sitting in town planning your wedding dress, tells me you're serious about this." She paused. "But I'll tell you something honestly. The first year is going to be hard, really hard. You're not just learning to be a rancher's wife. You're learning to live with another person, to share space and decisions and a bed with someone who's been on his own for years. There will be days you want to scream, days you'll wonder what you were thinking, days you'll seriously consider walking all the way back to Boston out of pure stubbornness. That's not very encouraging. It's not meant to be encouraging. It's meant to be truthful. Sarah's expression softened. But I'll also tell you this. Luke Barrett is one of the good ones. He's honest, he's hardworking, and from what I've heard, he's treating you with a lot more respect than most mail-order grooms show their brides. If you can get through that first hard year, if you can figure out how to work together instead of against each other, you'll have something real, something worth keeping. After Sarah left, Evelyn sat at the writing desk and tried to compose a letter to her late mother's sister in Philadelphia, the only remaining family member who might care that she was getting married. But the words wouldn't come. How could she explain any of this? How could she describe Luke or the ranch or the strange alchemy that was transforming fear into something that might be hope? Finally, she gave up and simply wrote the facts. She was marrying a rancher named Luke Barrett in 2 weeks, and she was staying in Colorado. She didn't know if her aunt would write back, but at least she'd made the effort. The days before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. Martha insisted on making Evelyn a proper wedding dress, though Evelyn protested that it was an unnecessary expense. "Every bride deserves a nice dress," Martha said firmly, pinning fabric around Evelyn's waist. "Even mail-order brides marrying practical ranchers. Maybe especially them. This might not be a love match yet, but that doesn't mean it can't look like one." The dress was simple but beautiful, cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. It made Evelyn look almost pretty, softening the sharp angles that hunger and stress had carved into her face over the past year. Luke, meanwhile, was making preparations of his own. He hired 2 ranch hands to help him get caught up on work he'd been neglecting while teaching Evelyn. He ordered supplies for the winter months ahead. He cleaned the house from top to bottom and made small improvements, fixing a loose floorboard in the bedroom, replacing cracked glass in one window, building new shelves in the kitchen. "I want everything to be right," he told Evelyn when she teased him about his sudden burst of domestic energy. "I want you to feel like it's your home, not just my house that you're living in." 3 days before the wedding, Luke did something unexpected. He asked Evelyn to go for a ride, not to the ranch but in the opposite direction, up into the mountains. "There's something I want to show you," he said. "A place that's important to me. I want you to see it before we marry." They rode for over an hour, following narrow trails that climbed steadily higher. The air grew cooler and thinner, making Evelyn slightly breathless. Just when she thought she couldn't ride another minute, Luke guided them through a narrow gap between 2 rocky outcroppings, and they emerged into a hidden valley. It was breathtakingly beautiful. A natural spring bubbled up from the rocks, creating a small pool of crystal-clear water before flowing out to join a creek. The valley was carpeted in wildflowers: purple lupine, yellow arnica, white columbine. Aspen trees ringed the space, their leaves already beginning to turn gold at the edges. "Luke," Evelyn breathed, "this is incredible." "My father found this place when he first came west," Luke said, dismounting and helping Evelyn down. "He and my mother used to come here in the early years of their marriage before things got hard between them. My mother loved it. She said it was like a little piece of paradise hidden away from the world." They walked to the edge of the pool, and Luke sat down on a flat rock near the water. Evelyn joined him, careful with her skirts. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked softly. Luke was quiet for a long moment, staring at the water. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful and a little uncertain. "Because I wanted you to know about this place before we marry. It's the most beautiful spot on my land, maybe in the whole territory. My parents came here when they were happy. I want us to have the same opportunity, a place we can come to when we need to remember why we chose this, a place that's just ours." Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes. "That's beautiful. There's something else." Luke turned to face her directly. "Evelyn, I've been thinking a lot about what I want to say to you before we marry, about what I want you to know." He took a deep breath. "This started as a practical arrangement. I needed help. You needed security. That was the deal. But somewhere over the past few weeks, it became more than that for me. I don't know exactly when it happened. Maybe when I saw you refuse to give up on learning to milk that damn cow even after it kicked over the bucket 3 times. Or maybe when you reorganized my accounts and showed me I was actually making more money than I thought. Or maybe it was just the accumulation of 100 small moments. But the point is, I'm not marrying you anymore just because I need a ranch hand. I'm marrying you because I want you in my life. Because I like who I am when you're around. because I think we could build something real together, something that goes beyond the practical necessities. Evelyn's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts over the sound of it. Luke, Wait, let me finish. He held up a hand. I'm not saying I'm in love with you. I don't know if what I feel is love or just the beginning of it or something else entirely, but I am saying that I care about you, that your happiness matters to me, that I want this marriage to be real in every sense of the word, not just a legal arrangement, but a partnership built on genuine affection and respect. What are you asking me? Evelyn's voice was barely above a whisper. I'm asking if you feel the same way. If this has become more than just a transaction for you too. Because if it hasn't, if you're still just doing this out of necessity, then we need to figure that out now before we stand up in front of the whole town and make promises to each other. Evelyn looked at Luke, really looked at him. She saw the way the afternoon light caught the gray in his hair, the worry lines around his eyes, the strength in his shoulders that came from years of hard work. She thought about the patience he'd shown her, the kindness that seemed to come as naturally to him as breathing, the way he'd made space in his life for her without demanding she fill it in any particular way. She thought about how her stomach fluttered when she saw him riding up to the boarding house each morning, how she'd started thinking of small things to tell him throughout the day, saving up observations and questions for their evening conversations, how she'd caught herself wondering what it would be like to wake up next to him, to share not just work and meals, but the intimate moments that made a marriage real. It's not just a transaction anymore, she said finally. I don't know if what I feel is love either, but I know that when I think about the future now, you're in it. Not just as the man who gave me a way out of Boston, but as someone I genuinely want to build a life with, someone I'm starting to care about. The relief on Luke's face was palpable. Yeah? Yeah. Evelyn managed a shaky smile. I'm scared out of my mind about the wedding and the wedding night and all of it. But it's not because of you. It's because I'm afraid I'll mess this up somehow, that I'll disappoint you or fail to be what you need. You couldn't disappoint me if you tried, Luke said firmly. Evelyn, I've watched you learn and adapt and push yourself beyond what you thought you were capable of. You've already proven you can handle ranch life. The rest, the personal part, the intimate part, we'll figure out together. There's no timeline, no expectations beyond what we set for ourselves. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. It was the most deliberately romantic gesture he'd made since she'd arrived, and Evelyn felt her breath catch at the intimacy of it. I need you to know something, Luke continued, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. The wedding night. I won't push you. I know you're nervous, and I understand why. We'll take things as slowly as you need. If all we do is sleep side by side, that's enough. If you need more time before we consummate the marriage, I'll wait. Your comfort matters more to me than any expectations about what's supposed to happen. Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't even realized was tight. You'd really be willing to wait? As long as you need. I want you to come to me because you want to, not because you think you have to. That's important to me. They sat there for a long time, hands clasped, watching the light change as the sun moved across the sky. The spring burbled beside them, and somewhere in the distance, an eagle cried. It was peaceful in a way Evelyn had never experienced. Not the absence of sound, but a kind of deep, settled quietness that seemed to come from within as much as from the valley around them. I want to kiss you, Luke said eventually, his voice low. But I'm not going to unless you want me to. Evelyn's heart skipped. They'd been alone together many times over the past weeks, but Luke had been scrupulously careful about maintaining proper distance. This was the first time he'd acknowledged the attraction that had been building between them. I want you to, she whispered. Luke leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. When his lips finally met hers, the kiss was gentle and questioning, nothing demanding or forceful, just a soft exploration. Evelyn's eyes fluttered closed, and she let herself feel it fully. The warmth of his mouth, the slight scratch of his beard against her skin, the way his free hand came up to cup her cheek with surprising tenderness. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn was breathless. Oh. Luke's eyes crinkled with amusement. That's all you've got? I wasn't expecting. She stopped, unsure how to articulate what she was feeling. That was nice. Just nice? Very nice. Evelyn felt herself blushing. I've been kissed before, but never like that. Never with so much care. Luke's expression grew serious again. That's how it should always be, especially between us. Evelyn, I promise you, I will always be careful with you, not just physically, but in every way. Your feelings, your fears, your hopes, they matter to me. They'll always matter to me. Evelyn felt tears threatening again, but this time they were tears of relief rather than fear. I believe you. They stayed in the hidden valley until the shadows grew long, and Luke said they needed to head back before full darkness fell. As they rode down the mountain trail, Evelyn found herself thinking about the wedding in just 3 days. What had seemed terrifying now felt almost inevitable, as if all the scattered pieces of her life had been moving toward this moment without her realizing it. That night at the boarding house, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the afternoon in her mind, the beauty of the valley, the earnestness in Luke's voice when he talked about wanting their marriage to be real, the sweet tenderness of that kiss. She'd come west expecting to endure whatever was necessary to survive. She hadn't expected to find someone who seemed genuinely invested in her happiness. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Martha woke Evelyn early, insisting she eat a proper breakfast even though Evelyn's stomach was too full of butterflies to feel hungry. You need your strength, Martha said firmly, setting down a plate of eggs and toast. It's going to be a long day. Sarah Mitchell arrived mid-morning to help Evelyn dress and fix her hair. Between the two older women, they transformed Evelyn from a nervous, uncertain girl into something that looked remarkably like a bride. The cream dress fit perfectly, Martha's embroidery adding a delicate beauty that made Evelyn feel almost pretty. Sarah pinned her hair up in a simple but elegant style and tucked wildflowers into it, columbine and lupine, the same flowers that grew in Luke's hidden valley. You look beautiful, Martha said, her eyes suspiciously bright. Luke's not going to know what hit him. The wedding was scheduled for 2 o'clock at the small church on the edge of town. As they walked through Redstone's dusty streets toward the church, Evelyn was acutely aware of people watching from windows and porches. The whole town had turned out to see the mail-order bride marry Luke Barrett. The church was simple but clean, with wooden pews and plain glass windows. Wildflowers had been arranged at the altar, someone's kind gesture, though Evelyn didn't know whose. A handful of townspeople filled the first few rows, curious spectators to this frontier wedding. And there, standing at the altar in a clean black suit that Evelyn had never seen him wear, was Luke. He looked different dressed up, more formal, almost elegant despite his weathered hands and sun-darkened face. But when his eyes found hers across the length of the church, the expression in them was pure Luke, steady, patient, and warm with something that might have been joy. Martha walked Evelyn down the aisle, her hand firm and supportive on Evelyn's arm. You can still change your mind, Martha whispered as they moved slowly forward. Right up until you say, I do, you can walk away. Nobody would blame you. But Evelyn didn't want to walk away. For the first time since her father died and her world fell apart, she felt like she was moving towards something instead of just running away. She felt like she was choosing her own future instead of having it chosen for her. When they reached the altar, Martha placed Evelyn's hand in Luke's and stepped back. His grip was warm and steady, and when Evelyn looked up at him, he smiled, a small, private smile just for her. The minister began speaking, his words washing over Evelyn in a blur. She was intensely aware of Luke beside her, of the weight of his hand holding hers, of the significance of what they were about to do. This wasn't like the marriages she'd witnessed in Boston, elaborate society affairs with hundreds of guests and expensive receptions. This was simple, practical, and honest, exactly like the man she was marrying. Do you, Evelyn Marie Hart, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live? Evelyn took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment everything changed. Once she said these words, there was no going back. She would be Luke Barrett's wife, bound to him by law and custom and her own freely given promise. She looked up at Luke, finding those steady gray eyes watching her with an expression she was learning to read. There was no pressure in his gaze, no demand, just patience. He would wait for her answer however long it took, and if she said no, he would honor that choice too. But Evelyn didn't want to say no. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the life they could build together, wanted the possibility of something real and lasting. "I do," she said, her voice clear and certain. Luke's smile widened, transforming his entire face. The minister turned to him, repeating the same vows, and Luke's response came immediately, without hesitation. "I do." They exchanged simple gold bands that Luke had ordered from a jeweler in Denver. Evelyn's fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her finger specifically. She watched as Luke slipped it on, his hand steady despite the magnitude of what they were doing. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Luke, you may kiss your bride." Luke leaned down slowly, giving Evelyn time to prepare herself. But nothing could have prepared her for kissing him in front of the entire town, making their union official in public. His lips were gentle on hers, the kiss brief and chaste but full of promise. When they pulled apart, Evelyn was officially Mrs. Luke Barrett. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. The small crowd erupted in polite applause. Martha was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. Sarah was smiling broadly, and Luke was looking at Evelyn like she was the most precious thing he'd ever held. "Hello, wife," he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. "Hello, husband," Evelyn whispered back, and felt something inside her shift and settle, like a key turning in a lock. She was home. Martha had insisted on hosting a small reception at the boarding house, and despite Luke's protests that it wasn't necessary, Evelyn was grateful for the buffer between the ceremony and what came after. The thought of riding straight out to the ranch as husband and wife, of facing their first night together without any transition, made her stomach clench with anxiety. The gathering was modest but warm. Martha had prepared a simple meal of roasted chicken, fresh bread, and vegetables from her garden. There was even a small cake, which made Evelyn's eyes sting with unexpected emotion. She hadn't expected anyone to go to such trouble for her. "You're part of this community now," Sarah said, noticing Evelyn's reaction. "We take care of our own." Luke stayed close to Evelyn throughout the reception, his hand occasionally touching the small of her back, a gentle reminder of his presence. She noticed how he deflected the more intrusive questions from curious townspeople, protecting her from having to explain too much about her past or her reasons for coming west. "Let them wonder," he said quietly when someone asked pointed questions about Evelyn's family back east. "They'll get tired of speculation eventually." As the afternoon wore on, Evelyn found herself relaxing slightly. The wine Martha served helped, warming her from the inside and softening the sharp edges of her nervousness. Luke noticed and caught her eye with a small smile that seemed to say he understood exactly what she was feeling. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Luke leaned close to her ear. "We should head out soon. I want to get home before dark." Home. The word sent a thrill of something through Evelyn, anticipation mixed with fear, excitement tangled with dread. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. They said their goodbyes, accepting well wishes and advice from the assembled guests. Martha hugged Evelyn tightly, whispering, "Remember what I told you, you're stronger than you think." The ride to the ranch felt both too long and too short. They traveled in comfortable silence, the horses setting an easy pace. Evelyn's belongings, such as they were, had been loaded onto a small wagon that Luke had hired one of the ranch hands to drive out earlier in the day. Everything she owned in the world was now at the ranch, waiting for her. As they crested the final rise and the valley came into view, Evelyn felt her heart skip. The house looked golden in the late afternoon light, solid and welcoming. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone had started a fire in the stove earlier, probably the same ranch hand who'd delivered her things. Luke helped her dismount, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Welcome home, Mrs. Barrett." The formality of the name startled her. She was Mrs. Barrett now, not Miss Hart, not the desperate Boston woman who'd answered a mail-order bride advertisement, but Luke's wife. The reality of it hit her like a physical blow. "Are you all right?" Luke's voice was gentle, concerned. "I don't know." Evelyn admitted. I think so. I just need a moment to catch my breath. Take all the time you need. Luke began unsaddling the horses, giving her space. I'm going to get the animals settled. Why don't you go inside, look around? Your trunk should be in the bedroom, our bedroom. You can unpack if you want, or just sit and rest, whatever feels right. Evelyn nodded and walked slowly toward the house. The porch steps creaked under her feet, a familiar sound now after weeks of visiting. But everything felt different walking through that door as Luke's wife rather than as a potential bride evaluating her options. Inside, the house was warm and tidy. Someone, Luke, she assumed, had arranged wildflowers in a jar on the table. The fire in the stove had burned down to coals but still radiated heat. Her trunk sat in the bedroom doorway, too large to have been maneuvered inside the room without help. Evelyn stood in the doorway of what was now her bedroom, looking at the large bed with its wedding ring quilt. This was where she would sleep tonight, where she would sleep every night for the rest of her life, where she would share intimacies with Luke that she could barely imagine. Her hands trembled as she began unpacking her trunk, hanging her few dresses in the wardrobe beside Luke's shirts and trousers. The mingling of their belongings felt deeply significant, as if by sharing closet space they were somehow becoming permanently intertwined. She was folding her undergarments into a drawer when she heard Luke's boots on the porch. Her heart started racing again, that familiar flutter of nervousness that had become her constant companion. Luke appeared in the doorway, having removed his jacket and vest. In just his white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, he looked more like the man she'd come to know over the past weeks, practical, hardworking, at ease in his own space. Settling in? He asked. Trying to. Evelyn closed the drawer and turned to face him. Luke, I need to be honest with you about something. His expression grew serious. All right. I'm terrified. Not of you specifically, but of tonight, of what's expected. I know you said we could take things slowly, but we're married now, and there are obligations, and She stopped, frustrated with herself. I'm rambling. You are a bit, Luke agreed, but his tone was kind. He came into the room and sat on the edge of the bed, patting the space beside him. Come here. Evelyn sat, careful to leave space between them. Luke didn't try to close that gap. Let me tell you what I think should happen tonight, he said. We're going to have supper together, something simple, since neither of us is probably very hungry. We're going to sit by the fire and talk, just like we've done dozens of times over the past weeks. And then, when it's time for bed, we're going to sleep. That's all. Just sleep. But Luke, we're married now. You have rights. Rights? Luke's voice took on an edge Evelyn had never heard before. Evelyn, look at me. She did, and found his gray eyes blazing with intensity. I don't care what the law says or what society expects. You're not an obligation to be fulfilled or a duty to be performed. You're my wife, yes, but you're also a person with your own feelings and fears and needs. And right now, what you need is time to adjust to this new situation. So that's what I'm giving you. What if I never adjust? What if I'm always this scared? Then we'll figure it out together. But Evelyn, I don't believe you'll always be this scared. I think once you realize that I mean what I say, that I'm not going to push you or force you or make demands you're not ready to meet, you'll start to relax. And when you're ready, when you come to me because you want to and not because you think you have to, that's when we'll consummate this marriage. He reached out and took her hand. I can wait. I've waited this long for the right partner. I can wait a little longer for the right moment. Evelyn felt tears spill over and run down her cheeks. You're not like any man I've ever known. I hope that's a good thing. It's the best thing. She squeezed his hand. Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for taking a chance on this life. On me. Luke stood up, pulling her gently to her feet. Now, let's see about some supper. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage eggs and bacon. Does that sound acceptable? They moved into the main room, and Luke busied himself at the stove while Evelyn set the table. The domesticity of it was soothing. Just two people preparing a meal together, no different from dozens of other couples across the territory doing the same thing on this same evening. Over their simple supper, they talked about practical matters. Luke explained the morning routines on the ranch, when he typically woke, how he liked his coffee, what chores needed to be done first thing. Evelyn told him about her own preferences and habits, negotiating the small details that would shape their daily life together. I like to read before bed, Evelyn said. Is that all right? I won't keep you awake? I do the same thing most nights. We can read together. Luke paused. Though I should warn you, I usually fall asleep within about 10 minutes of opening a book. It's not the most exciting company. Evelyn smiled. I think I can live with that. After supper, they washed the dishes together, Evelyn washing while Luke dried. Then they sat by the fire, and Luke pulled out the book he'd been reading, a practical volume about cattle breeding. Evelyn had brought down one of his mother's poetry books, the one with notes in the margins. They sat side by side on the settee, each absorbed in their own reading, occasionally sharing interesting passages. The fire crackled. Outside, the night sounds of the ranch began. Cattle lowing in the distance, the wind rustling through the cottonwoods, an owl hooting somewhere nearby. Evelyn felt herself relaxing for the first time all day. This wasn't so different from the evenings they'd spent together over the past weeks. Luke's presence beside her was comforting rather than threatening. When his shoulder brushed against hers as he shifted position, she didn't flinch away. "Luke?" she said softly. "Hmm?" He looked up from his book, and she realized he hadn't been reading at all. He'd been staring at the same page for the past 10 minutes. "Are you nervous too?" A slow smile spread across his face. Terrified. "Really?" The admission surprised her. "But you seem so calm." "That's because I've had a lot of practice hiding what I'm feeling. Comes from living alone for so long. Nobody to share your feelings with, so you learn to keep them to yourself." He closed his book and set it aside. "But yes, I'm nervous. This is a big change for me, too. I've lived alone in this house for 5 years, done things my own way, answered to nobody but myself. Now I have to consider someone else's needs and preferences. I have to share my space and my life. That's not easy, even when it's what I want." "What if we're terrible at being married?" Evelyn voiced the fear that had been lurking at the back of her mind. "What if we can't figure out how to live together? Then we'll be terrible at it together, and we'll keep trying until we get better." Luke reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Evelyn, I don't expect this to be perfect. I expect it to be hard and awkward and confusing sometimes, but I also expect that we'll figure it out because we're both committed to making this work. That has to count for something." "It counts for a lot," Evelyn said softly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, hands still clasped. Eventually, Evelyn's eyes grew heavy, the exhaustion of the day catching up with her. She yawned despite trying to suppress it. "Time for bed," Luke said, noticing. "You're worn out." "I suppose I am." Evelyn felt her nervousness returning, but it was muted now, manageable. "Luke, about the sleeping arrangements, I'll take the settee if you'd be more comfortable alone." "No." The word came out more forcefully than she'd intended. "I mean, that's not necessary. It's your bed, too. We can share it without anything else happening. Can't we?" "Of course we can." Luke stood up and began banking the fire, making sure it was safe to leave overnight. "I'll give you some privacy to change. Just let me know when you're ready." In the bedroom, Evelyn changed into her nightgown with shaking hands. It was plain white cotton, modest and practical, but she felt exposed in a way she never had before. This was her wedding night. By all rights and customs, this should be the night she gave herself to her husband, consummating their marriage and sealing their bond. But Luke had promised they would wait, and she believed him. That belief was perhaps the most remarkable thing of all, that she could trust a man she'd known for less than a month to keep his word about something so intimate and important. "I'm ready," she called out, climbing into bed and pulling the covers up to her chin. Luke entered, carrying a lamp. He changed into loose cotton trousers and kept his undershirt on. Evelyn was grateful for that small concession to modesty. He set the lamp on the bedside table and climbed into bed on the other side, carefully maintaining space between them. "Comfortable?" he asked. "As comfortable as I can be, I suppose." Luke reached over and turned down the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, broken only by faint moonlight through the window. Evelyn could hear him breathing beside her, could feel the slight dip in the mattress from his weight, could smell the faint scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "Good night, Evelyn," Luke said softly. "Good night, Luke." She lay rigid in the darkness, hyper-aware of every sound and sensation. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Gradually, she heard Luke's breathing deepen and slow as he fell asleep. The man could apparently sleep through anything, just as he'd warned her. Evelyn let herself relax incrementally, muscle by muscle, until she was lying naturally instead of holding herself in rigid attention. The bed was comfortable, the room was warm, and her husband, was sleeping peacefully beside her. Nothing terrible had happened. Luke had kept his word. She drifted off thinking that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. Evelyn woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she was disoriented, not recognizing her surroundings. Then memory returned, and she sat up abruptly. She was at the ranch. She was married. And judging by the empty space beside her, Luke had already gotten up. She dressed quickly in her work dress and emerged from the bedroom to find Luke at the stove, cooking something that smelled like bacon. He'd already dressed for the day, his hair still damp from washing. "Good morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "I hope I didn't wake you. I tried to be quiet." "You didn't. I'm just not used to—" She gestured vaguely at the domestic scene. "Having someone cook you breakfast?" Luke smiled. "Skin. Well, get used to it. I'm usually up before dawn anyway. Seemed silly to wake you when you were sleeping so peacefully." They ate breakfast together, and then Luke led her through the morning chores that would become her routine. He showed her again how to feed the chickens and collect eggs, how to check the cattle for any signs of illness or injury, how to maintain the various systems that kept the ranch running smoothly. "I know I've shown you all this before," Luke said, "but it's different when it's your responsibility instead of just something you're learning. I want to make sure you feel confident handling things on your own when I'm out working the far pastures." Over the following days, they fell into a rhythm. Luke would wake first and start the coffee, then wake Evelyn. They'd work together on the morning chores, have breakfast, and then split up to tackle their individual responsibilities. Evelyn took over the household tasks, cooking, cleaning, laundry, while also managing the kitchen garden, the chickens, and the accounts. Luke handled the heavier ranch work, though he often enlisted Evelyn's help when he needed an extra pair of hands. The nights were the hardest. Each evening, they'd share supper and sit by the fire, talking or reading. And each night, they'd climb into bed together, maintaining that careful space between them. Luke never pressured her, never even hinted that he was waiting for her to be ready. But Evelyn was increasingly aware of the tension building between them, not hostile or uncomfortable, but definitely present. She found herself noticing things about Luke she hadn't paid attention to before. The strength in his forearms when he lifted heavy feed sacks, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck when it got too long, the rare full smile that transformed his entire face when something genuinely pleased him, the patient gentleness of his hands when he was working with an injured animal or repairing something delicate. And she noticed the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't paying attention, with warmth and something that might have been longing, quickly masked when he realized she'd seen. 2 weeks after their wedding, Sarah Mitchell came to visit, bringing fresh bread and a basket of late-season vegetables from her garden. Evelyn was grateful for the company, and they sat on the porch shelling peas while Sarah caught her up on the town gossip. "So," Sarah said eventually, her tone carefully casual, "how are you settling in?" "Really?" Evelyn considered how to answer. "Better than I expected. He's very patient." "That's one word for it." Sarah gave her a knowing look. "Evelyn, I'm not trying to pry, but you look like a woman who hasn't been sleeping well. Is everything all right between you and Luke?" "Everything's fine. Better than fine. He's been wonderful." Evelyn paused. "Maybe too wonderful." "How can someone be too wonderful?" "He's giving me space. Time to adjust. He won't touch me, won't even try to kiss me, unless I initiate it. And I'm grateful for that. Truly I am. But Sarah, we've been married for 2 weeks, and we haven't been intimate. I don't know if he's waiting for some signal from me, or if he's having second thoughts, or if—" "Stop," Sarah interrupted gently. "Evelyn, listen to me. Luke Barrett is not having second thoughts. That man looks at you like you're water in the desert. But he's also the kind of man who'd rather die than make you uncomfortable. He's giving you time because he thinks that's what you need. If you want something different, you're going to have to tell him." "Tell him what?" Please consummate our marriage? That's humiliating. It's honest communication, and marriage without honest communication is doomed from the start. Sarah set down her bowl of peas. Let me tell you something. When I married my husband, I was so nervous on our wedding night that I actually vomited from fear. He held my hair back, cleaned me up, and then sat with me on the edge of the bed for 2 hours talking about absolutely nothing until I calmed down. We didn't consummate the marriage that night either. We waited 3 days until I felt ready. And you know what made the difference? I told him I was ready. I used actual words. It wasn't romantic or elegant, but it was clear, and that's what mattered. After Sarah left, Evelyn thought about what she'd said. Was she ready? She examined her feelings carefully, trying to separate genuine desire from obligation, real readiness from simple impatience with the status quo. The truth was, she was attracted to Luke. Somewhere over the past weeks, she'd stopped seeing him as a practical necessity and started seeing him as a man, a good, kind, attractive man who happened to be her husband. When he touched her hand or brushed past her in the kitchen, she felt warmth spread through her body. When he smiled at her across the dinner table, her heart did a little skip. When they lay side by side at night, she found herself wanting to close that careful distance between them. She was ready, or at least she wanted to be ready. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed now by curiosity and genuine desire to be Luke's wife in every sense of the word. That evening, Evelyn cooked Luke's favorite meal, beef stew with fresh biscuits. She'd learned over the weeks what he liked, and she'd gotten better at preparing it. After supper, instead of sitting by the fire as usual, she suggested they go for a walk. A walk? Luke looked surprised. It's getting dark. Just around the property. I want to see the stars. She held out her hand. Please? Luke took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. They walked in comfortable silence, following the path down to the creek. The night was cool and clear, the stars beginning to emerge overhead in their thousands. When they reached the creek bank, Evelyn stopped and turned to face Luke. In the fading light, she could just make out his features, the concern in his eyes as he studied her face. Luke, I need to tell you something. All right. His voice was wary, as if he was preparing himself for bad news. I'm ready. The words came out in a rush. I'm ready to be your wife, really your wife, if you still want that, if you haven't changed your mind. Luke's expression transformed. Changed my mind? Evelyn, I've been half crazy waiting for you to be ready. The only reason I've kept my hands to myself is because I promised I would. But if you're saying what I think you're saying, I'm saying I want you, Evelyn interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. I want you to kiss me. I want you to touch me. I want us to have a real marriage starting tonight. Luke closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to cup her face. Are you sure? Because once we start this, there's no going back. I'm sure. And she was. The fear was still there, but it was manageable now, outweighed by anticipation and a deep growing trust in the man standing before her. Luke kissed her then, and it was nothing like the gentle, chaste kiss at their wedding or the sweet exploration by the spring. This kiss was hungry and demanding, months of restrained desire pouring out all at once. Evelyn gasped against his mouth, and Luke took the opportunity to deepen the kiss, his tongue sliding against hers in a way that made her knees weak. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Luke rested his forehead against hers. We should go back to the house. Yes. Evelyn's voice came out breathless. We should. They walked back hand in hand, neither speaking but both feeling the weight of what was about to happen. Inside the house, Luke lit a lamp and carried it into the bedroom. Evelyn followed, her heart racing but her mind clear and certain. Luke set the lamp on the bedside table and turned to face her. I need you to tell me if anything doesn't feel right. If you want me to stop, you just say so. Promise me. I promise. Evelyn reached up and began unbuttoning his shirt with trembling fingers. But Luke, I don't want you to be so careful with me that you can't enjoy this too. I want this to be good for both of us. It will be. Luke's hands found the buttons of her dress, working them free with surprising deftness. I promise you, it will be. What followed was tender and awkward and sometimes fumbling, as first times often are. But it was also real and honest and laced with genuine care. Luke kept his word about checking in with her, making sure she was comfortable, adjusting when she expressed discomfort. And Evelyn surprised herself by being more engaged than she'd expected, responding to Luke's touch with a passion she hadn't known she possessed. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the wedding ring quilt, Evelyn's head on Luke's chest and his arm wrapped around her shoulders. She could hear his heartbeat gradually slowing, could feel the rise and fall of his breathing. "Are you all right?" Luke asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "More than all right." Evelyn tilted her head to look up at him. "Luke, that was—" "I know." He smiled down at her. "For me, too." They lay in comfortable silence for a while, the lamp burning low on the bedside table. Evelyn felt a profound sense of peace settling over her. This was what marriage should be: partnership and passion, work and intimacy, all woven together into something that was starting to feel remarkably like home. "Luke," she murmured, already half asleep. "Hmm?" "Thank you for waiting, for giving me time to be ready. Thank you for trusting me enough to let me close." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Good night, wife." "Good night, husband." As Evelyn drifted off to sleep in Luke's arms, she thought about how far she'd come from that terrified woman frozen in a stagecoach, too afraid to step down into her new life. She'd taken that step. She'd taken so many steps since then, each one requiring courage she hadn't been sure she possessed. And each step had brought her closer to this moment, to this man, to this life that was slowly becoming hers. She'd thought she was coming west to survive. What she'd found instead was the possibility of something more. Not just survival, but genuine happiness. Not just security, but real partnership. Not just a practical arrangement, but something that was beginning to feel remarkably like love. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. She knew that. There would be hard days and difficult seasons, challenges and setbacks. But lying there in Luke's arms, listening to his steady heartbeat, Evelyn felt ready to face whatever came. Because she wasn't facing it alone anymore. She had a partner. She had a home. She had chosen this life, and this life had chosen her back. And that made all the difference. The first winter came hard and fast, arriving in late October with a blizzard that buried the ranch under 3 feet of snow. Evelyn woke to a world transformed, everything she could see through the frost-etched window, white and silent and deeply foreign. "Stay inside today," Luke said, already dressed and preparing to venture out to the barn. "The animals need tending, but there's no reason for both of us to freeze." "I can help," Evelyn protested, but Luke was already shaking his head. "Not in this. The drifts are over your head in places. I'll be back as soon as I can." He kissed her forehead, a gesture that had become natural over the past months. "Keep the fire going and don't worry if I'm gone longer than usual. Sometimes it takes a while to dig through to the barn." He was gone for 3 hours. 3 hours during which Evelyn paced the small house, jumping at every sound, imagining all the terrible things that could happen to a man alone in a blizzard. When Luke finally stumbled back through the door, covered in snow and half frozen, she burst into tears. "Hey, I'm all right," he said, pulling her into his arms despite being soaked through. "The animals are fed and watered. We're good for today." "You were gone so long, I thought—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I know. I'm sorry. It took longer than I expected." Luke stripped off his wet clothes and moved to the fire, shivering. "This is ranch life in winter, Evelyn. There will be days like this. Days when the work is hard and dangerous and has to be done regardless of the weather." "I hate it," she said fiercely. "I hate not being able to help. I hate sitting here useless while you risk yourself out there." Luke looked at her for a long moment. "You're not useless. You're keeping the house warm and the meals ready. That matters. But if you really want to help with the outside work, we'll get you proper winter gear and I'll teach you how to move safely in deep snow. Deal?" "Deal." True to his word, Luke ordered heavy wool clothing and sturdy boots from the general store, and over the following weeks he taught Evelyn how to navigate the winter landscape. She learned to read the snow, to recognize dangerous drifts and hidden obstacles. She learned to move efficiently and cold that bit through layers of clothing and made her lungs ache. She learned that ranch work didn't stop for weather, that animals needed care regardless of temperature or conditions. It was brutal, exhausting work. There were days when Evelyn wondered what had possessed her to leave Boston, where the worst winter hardship was a cold walk to the market. But there were also moments of stark beauty that took her breath away. The way the sunrise painted the snow-covered mountains pink and gold, the crystalline silence of a winter morning, the satisfaction of completing hard tasks alongside Luke. They grew closer through necessity and proximity. Living in such a small space through the long winter months meant they had to learn to navigate each other's moods and habits. Luke tended towards silence when he was worried or tired, while Evelyn needed to talk through her anxieties. They learned to accommodate these differences, Luke forcing himself to share his concerns, and Evelyn learning when to give him quiet space. One evening in February, as they sat by the fire mending harnesses, Luke spoke into the comfortable silence. "I got a letter from a cattle buyer in Denver today. He's interested in purchasing part of the herd in spring." "That's good, isn't it?" Evelyn looked up from the leather she was stitching. "It's very good. Better price than I usually get. But it means I'll need to drive about 50 head to Denver in April. That's a 10-day trip, maybe longer depending on weather and how the cattle move." He paused. "I'll need to hire some hands to help, but I'll still be gone for at least 2 weeks. Evelyn felt her stomach clench. 2 weeks alone on the ranch, managing everything by herself. The thought terrified her, but she looked at Luke's face and saw the hope there, the excitement of a good business opportunity, and she forced herself to nod. "All right, we'll manage." "You're sure? Sarah Mitchell said she'd be happy to come stay with you if you'd prefer company." "No, I can handle it." Evelyn set down her mending. "Luke, I need to learn to manage on my own sometimes. What if you got injured or sick? What if something happened and I had to run the ranch solo for a while? I can't rely on you being here every single day forever." Luke studied her face. "When did you get so practical?" "I learned from you." She smiled. "Besides, it's only 2 weeks. I survived 26 years before meeting you. I think I can manage 14 days. When Luke left in April with 50 head of cattle and 2 hired hands, Evelyn stood on the porch and watched until they disappeared over the rise. Then she turned back to the house, squared her shoulders, and got to work. The first few days were the hardest. Every sound made her jump. Every task seemed to take twice as long without Luke's help. But gradually, she found her rhythm. She discovered she could manage the morning chores efficiently if she planned her route through the barn carefully. She learned to anticipate problems before they became crises. She even handled a difficult calving on her own, staying up all night in the barn and successfully delivering a healthy calf when the mother struggled. Sarah did visit twice, bringing food and company and reassurance that Evelyn was doing well. Other neighbors stopped by too, people Evelyn had met at church or in town, checking on the lone woman at the Barrett Ranch. She realized, with some surprise, that she'd become part of a community without quite noticing it happening. When Luke finally returned, exhausted and covered in trail dust, but grinning with the success of a profitable sale, Evelyn surprised both of them by how glad she was to see him. She'd proven she could manage alone, but she didn't want to. She wanted partnership, wanted to share both the work and the rewards. "I missed you," she said simply as he swept her into his arms on the porch. "I missed you too. Every single day." Luke pulled back to look at her face. "How did it go? Any problems?" "Nothing I couldn't handle." Evelyn felt pride surge through her. "Luke, I did it. I managed the ranch on my own for 2 weeks, and everything's fine. Better than fine." His smile was incandescent. "I never doubted you for a second." That summer brought new challenges. A drought made water scarce and grazing sparse. Luke had to move the cattle more frequently, searching for adequate forage. The garden struggled despite Evelyn's careful tending. Money became tight as expenses mounted, and the promise of the fall roundup seemed far away. They learned to argue during those hard months. Small disagreements about priorities and spending escalated into real fights. Luke wanted to hire more help. Evelyn insisted they could manage alone and save the money. Luke said she was being unreasonably stubborn. Evelyn accused him of not trusting her capabilities. Their first real fight happened one August evening when the heat had made everyone irritable and the well water was running low. "We need to drill a new well," Luke said over supper. "The current one won't sustain us through another drought year." "We can't afford it," Evelyn countered, gesturing to the ledger she'd been working on earlier. Not if we want to buy the additional breeding stock you've been talking about. The well is more important than breeding stock. Is it? Without better cattle, we won't make enough money to survive long term. We need to think about the future, not just immediate needs. A well is thinking about the future. Luke's voice rose, frustration breaking through his usual calm. What good are better cattle if we don't have water for them? We have water. The well is fine for now. Fine isn't good enough. Evelyn, you don't understand. Don't. Her voice went cold. Don't you dare tell me I don't understand. I've been managing these accounts for months. I know exactly where we stand financially, and I'm telling you that drilling a new well right now would put us in a precarious position going into winter. Luke stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You know the numbers, but you don't know the land. You don't know what it's like to watch cattle die because there isn't enough water. I do. I've seen it happen.
Well, then maybe you should have thought about that before spending so much on those new saddles. Those saddles were necessary equipment. They were expensive equipment we could have done without. They stood facing each other across the table, both breathing hard, both furious. Then Luke grabbed his hat and headed for the door. Where are you going? Evelyn demanded. Out. I need air. The door slammed behind him. Evelyn stood in the suddenly quiet house, shaking with anger and something that felt like fear. Was this how it started? Was this how marriages fell apart, one argument at a time, each disagreement driving a wedge between partners until they couldn't remember why they'd come together in the first place? She thought about Luke's mother, slowly withering in this very house, unable to adapt or compromise. She thought about her own parents, their marriage strained by financial pressure until her father's death released them both from the struggle. She didn't want that.
She didn't want to become bitter and resentful, fighting over every decision until the partnership they'd built crumbled into nothing. When Luke returned an hour later, calmer but still tense, Evelyn was waiting on the porch. I'm sorry, she said before he could speak. Not for disagreeing with you, but for how I said it. You're right that I'm still learning about the land and the livestock. I should have listened more carefully to your concerns instead of just dismissing them. Luke sat down beside her on the porch steps. I'm sorry too. You've worked hard to understand the financial side of the ranch, and I shouldn't have implied your opinion doesn't matter. You're my partner. That means your voice carries equal weight, even when we disagree. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Evelyn spoke again. Can we compromise? What if we do a smaller well project, just enough to supplement the current one, and postpone the breeding stock purchase until next year? That could work. Could. Luke nodded slowly. We'd still have the security of adequate water, and we'd keep enough in reserve to get through winter comfortably. Then that's what we'll do. Luke reached over and took her hand. Evelyn, I need you to know something. We're going to fight. Probably more than once. We're both strong-willed people with our own ideas about how things should be done. But fighting doesn't mean we're failing. It just means we're two real people trying to figure out how to build a life together. I know that in my head, but in my heart, every argument makes me afraid we're making a mistake. We're not. Luke's voice was firm with certainty. The mistake would be not caring enough to fight. The mistake would be giving up when things get hard. But as long as we keep talking, keep compromising, keep remembering that we're on the same side, we'll be fine. Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder. Promise? Promise. Fall brought the roundup, and with it, one of the scariest moments of Evelyn's life. Luke was working with one of the young bulls, an aggressive animal that had already caused problems, when something spooked it. The bull charged, catching Luke off guard and knocking him into the fence, with enough force that Evelyn heard the impact from the house. She ran, faster than she'd known she could move, reaching the corral to find Luke on the ground, the bull pawing and snorting a few feet away. Without thinking, Evelyn grabbed a pitchfork leaning against the barn and jumped into the corral, putting herself between Luke and the bull. "Get out!" Luke yelled, trying to get to his feet. "Evelyn, get out of there!" But Evelyn stood her ground, waving the pitchfork and yelling at the bull with every ounce of authority she could muster. For a heart-stopping moment, the animal looked ready to charge. Then, perhaps confused by this unexpected opponent, it turned and trotted to the far end of the corral. Evelyn helped Luke to his feet, and they scrambled out of the corral together. Luke's face was pale beneath his tan, and he was holding his ribs carefully. That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen, he said through gritted teeth. Don't ever do that again. Then don't get yourself knocked unconscious by angry bulls. Evelyn's hands were shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. Are you hurt badly? Cracked ribs, probably. Nothing time won't heal. Luke looked at her with something like awe. You could have been killed. So could you. That's the point. Evelyn's voice broke slightly. Luke, I can't lose you. I won't lose you. Not to a bull, not to anything. Do you understand? He pulled her close despite his injured ribs, holding her while she shook with delayed reaction. I understand, and for what it's worth, I feel the same way about you. Luke's injury meant 6 weeks of limited activity, and Evelyn had to take on even more of the ranch work. It was exhausting and sometimes overwhelming, but it also proved something to both of them. They were a real team now, capable of supporting each other through difficulty. The second winter was easier than the first, partly because they knew what to expect, but mostly because they'd learned to work together efficiently. They developed routines and systems that minimized waste and maximized comfort. They spent long evenings by the fire, Luke reading aloud while Evelyn knitted or mended, creating a domestic peace that felt hard-won and precious. In March, Evelyn missed her monthly courses. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes prematurely. But when she missed a second month and began feeling queasy in the mornings, she could no longer deny the truth. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with a complex mixture of joy, terror, and wonder. A baby. She and Luke were going to have a baby. She would be a mother, and Luke would be a father, and their partnership would become a family. She told him one evening after supper, simply and directly, Luke, I think I'm expecting. He went very still, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his mouth. You're sure? As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. I've missed 2 monthly courses, and I've been sick in the mornings. Luke set down his cup carefully, as if afraid it might shatter. Then his face broke into the widest smile Evelyn had ever seen. We're having a baby. We're having a baby, Evelyn confirmed, and found herself smiling too despite her fears. Luke crossed to her in 2 strides and swept her into his arms, spinning her around before setting her down carefully. This is incredible. This is... Evelyn, you're going to be a mother. And you're going to be a father. She looked up at him. Are you ready for that? I don't know, but I'm ready to try. Luke placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. We'll figure it out together, just like we've figured out everything else. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Sarah Mitchell and the other ranch women rallied around Evelyn, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Luke became almost comically protective, insisting Evelyn rest more and work less, much to her amused frustration. I'm pregnant, not fragile, she protested when he tried to prevent her from lifting a basket of laundry. Humor me, Luke said. I've never done this before, and I'm terrified of something going wrong. Nothing's going to go wrong. Evelyn took his face in her hands. Luke, women have babies every day. I'm healthy and strong. This baby is going to be fine, and so am I. Their daughter was born on a cold December morning, making her entrance into the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the small house. Luke, who'd been white-faced with fear throughout the labor, held his daughter for the first time and promptly burst into tears. She's perfect, he whispered, staring down at the tiny red face. Evelyn, she's absolutely perfect. What should we name her? Evelyn asked, exhausted but exhilarated. Luke thought for a moment. What about Rose? After my mother? Evelyn remembered the notes in the margins of poetry books, the woman who'd loved literature and beauty even in the harsh Colorado wilderness. Rose? I like that. Rose Barrett. Baby Rose was a good-natured child who fit into ranch life as if she'd been born knowing exactly where she belonged. She slept in a cradle Luke had built during Evelyn's pregnancy, positioned near their bed so Evelyn could tend to her easily during night feedings. As she grew, Rose became a fixture of ranch life, riding in a sling on Evelyn's back while chores were done, napping in the shade while her parents worked nearby. 2 years later, they had a son. James, named for Luke's father, was as different from his sister as night from day, active and demanding where Rose had been placid. But Luke took to fatherhood with the same patient dedication he brought to everything else, walking colicky James for hours while Evelyn caught precious sleep. The ranch prospered. The supplementary wells served them well through several dry years. The improved breeding stock Luke had eventually purchased produced healthier, more valuable calves. Evelyn's careful management of their finances meant they had reserves for emergencies and investments in improvements. But more than material success, they'd built something intangible and infinitely more valuable: a real marriage, a genuine partnership, a family. 5 years after that terrifying day when Evelyn had frozen in the stagecoach, unable to step down into her unknown future, she stood on the porch of the ranch house and watched her children play in the yard. Rose, now 4, was showing 3-year-old James how to feed the chickens. Both children had Luke's gray eyes and Evelyn's dark hair, and they moved with the unselfconscious confidence of children who knew they were loved. Luke came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "About how different everything is from what I expected." Evelyn leaned back against him. "When I got on that stagecoach in Boston, I thought I was trading one form of desperation for another. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life just surviving, just getting by. And now? Now I know the difference between surviving and thriving. Now I have a partner who respects me and children who make me laugh and work that matters. Now I have a home." She turned in his arms to face him. "Luke, do you remember what you said to me that first day, when I was too scared to step out of the coach?" "I said a lot of things that day. You said I just had to decide if I trusted you enough to take your hand. That was all. Just that one small decision." Evelyn reached up and touched his face. "That was the best decision I ever made, taking your hand, trusting you, choosing this life." Luke smiled, that transformation that still made her heart skip after all these years. "The feeling is mutual. You've made this house a home, Evelyn. You've made me happier than I ever thought possible." They stood together on the porch, watching their children play, as the afternoon sun painted the mountains gold. From inside the house, Evelyn could smell the bread she had baking. In the barn, the animals were settled for the day. The garden was thriving, the cattle were healthy, and the ledgers showed they'd have enough to get through another winter with money left over for modest luxuries. But the real wealth wasn't in any of those things. The real wealth was standing beside her, solid and warm and permanent. The real wealth was the sound of her children's laughter. The real wealth was the knowledge that she'd built this life with her own hands and her own choices. Later that evening, after the children were tucked into their beds and the house was quiet, Evelyn made a rare trip to the root cellar to fetch preserves for the next day's breakfast. On her way back up, she paused, looking at the shelves lined with jars of vegetables and fruits she'd put up herself. Evidence of her work, her competence, her contribution to this life they'd built together. She thought about the Evelyn who'd arrived in Redstone 5 years ago, frightened, uncertain, desperate. That woman had been so afraid of everything, paralyzed by the enormity of the changes she was facing. If she could go back and tell that woman anything, what would it be? That the fear was real, but it wasn't the whole truth. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. That taking Luke's hand that day, literally and metaphorically, would lead to more happiness than she'd ever imagined possible. When Evelyn returned to the main room, Luke was banking the fire for the night. He looked up as she entered and smiled, that smile that still made her feel chosen and cherished. "Ready for bed?" he asked. "In a minute." Evelyn set down the preserves and crossed to the bookshelf, pulling out the volume of poetry with Luke's mother's notes in the margins. She opened it to a passage she'd marked months ago, words that had resonated with her own experience. "Listen to this," she said and read aloud. "Though the path be hard and long, and the destination uncertain, every journey begins with a single step, and sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply begin." Luke came to stand beside her, reading over her shoulder. "My mother wrote something in the margin there." Evelyn looked down and saw the delicate feminine handwriting. She wrote, "I was too afraid to take that first step, and it cost me everything. May whoever reads this be braver than I was." They were both quiet for a moment, thinking about Rose Barrett, the woman who'd come west as a mail-order bride and never quite found her footing, who'd struggled against a life she couldn't adapt to until it broke her. "I think," Luke said softly,
that my mother would have loved you, would have admired you. You did what she couldn't. You found the courage to embrace this life instead of just enduring it. I had something she didn't, Evelyn said. I had you, a partner who gave me choices instead of demands, time instead of pressure, respect instead of expectations. She closed the book carefully. Your mother's tragedy wasn't that she was weak. It was that she wasn't given the support she needed to become strong. Luke pulled her close, and they stood together in the warm, quiet house they'd made into a home. Outside, the Colorado night was cold and star-bright. Inside, the fire glowed, the children slept peacefully, and two people who'd started as strangers held each other with the comfortable familiarity of long partnership. I love you, Luke said quietly. I don't think I've said that enough, but I do. I love you, Evelyn Barrett. Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were good tears this time, tears of joy and gratitude and overwhelming contentment. I love you too. I think I have for a long time, but I was afraid to say it, afraid it would make me too vulnerable. And now? Now I know that vulnerability isn't weakness when you're with the right person. Now I know that opening your heart is the bravest thing you can do. She pulled back to look at him. Luke, thank you. For what? For waiting. For that first day when you stood outside that stagecoach and held out your hand and didn't rush me. For giving me time to find my courage. For believing I was worth the patience. Evelyn's voice grew thick with emotion. Everything I have, everything we've built, started with that moment. With you offering your hand and waiting, just waiting, until I was ready to take it. Luke cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. I'd wait 1,000 years if that's what you needed. You were worth every second, Evelyn. You'll always be worth it. They stood there in the lamplight, two people who'd taken a chance on each other and built something real from that fragile beginning. Outside, the ranch they'd carved out of wilderness stretched away into the darkness. Land they'd worked together, cattle they'd raised together, a life they'd created together. And in that moment, Evelyn understood something profound. She'd thought she was running away when she left Boston, fleeing debt and failure and shame. But she hadn't been running away. She'd been running toward something, even though she hadn't known it at the time. She'd been running toward this life, this man, this future that was now her present. The mail-order bride who'd been too afraid to step down from the stagecoach had found her courage. Not all at once, not in some grand dramatic gesture, but in 1,000 small decisions and daily acts of bravery. In choosing to trust, in choosing to try, in choosing to build instead of merely survive. Years later, when Rose and James were grown and had children of their own, they would ask their mother about how she and their father had met, and Evelyn would tell them the truth about the stagecoach and the fear and the cowboy who'd held out his hand and waited. The bravest thing I ever did, she would tell them, was take that hand. Everything else, every good thing in my life came from that one moment of courage. But that was still in the future. For now, on this quiet evening in their 5th year of marriage, Evelyn simply held her husband close and marveled at the life they'd built. A life that had started with paralyzing fear and grown into something beautiful and lasting. A life that proved that sometimes the most terrifying choices lead to the greatest rewards. The mail-order bride had become a rancher's wife, a mother, a partner, and more than all of those things, she'd become herself. The woman she was always meant to be, once she found the courage to step down from that stagecoach and into her own future. And it had all begun with a cowboy who knew how to wait, who understood that the best things in life couldn't be rushed or forced. Who knew that sometimes the greatest gift you could give someone was patience and space, and an outstretched hand that said, I'm here. Take your time. I'll wait. Luke had waited. Evelyn had found her courage, and together they'd built something worth all the fear and uncertainty that had come before. That was their story. That was their truth. And it was more than enough.